Chapter 4174. Chu Ho, in particular, was shocked. Before she had experienced the match, she could already imagine that Lisa's strength was not weak. Otherwise, Lin Shi's wrist would not have been so injured. However, she did not expect Lisa's strength to be so terrifying. She even felt that this girl's potential was far above hers. As the saying went, the younger generation will surpass us in time. That was the gist of it. As for Lisa, how could she not be surprised? What she did not expect was that Chu Ho's strength would be so great. She looked gentle and weak, but she did not expect that her strength would not be inferior to that of an official mercenary. Because of this, she was even more certain that the woman in front of her must be the governor of the International Criminal Police Force. She was amazing. To be able to compete with a famous character, Lisa's heart was immediately filled with motivation. She was not to be underestimated. Even if it was just a volleyball match, she would give it her all. Lisa was a person who had a strong desire to win. She would either never compete with others, or she would always want to be the best. The game was no exception. After a few rounds, no one was at a disadvantage. The score was maintained at a stalemate, and no one was willing to give way to the other. Even if one party led by a few points, the other party would catch up immediately. Bang! 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 Those who were in the know would know that they were playing volleyball, but those who were not would probably think that there was an explosion. Lisa gradually felt that the volleyball was going soft. It was full of air, but now, it felt like it was running out of energy. Not to mention Xiao Yichen and Yu, even Gu Jinglian was trembling with fear. Not to mention Yun Shishir and Hua Jin, who were not far away. Hua Jin asked meekly, if they play like this, will they break their hands? Yun Shishir muttered, I don't know if Chu Ho will, but I'm sure Lisa won't. Have you ever seen a child this big lift a 20-kilogram dumbbell like it's a toy? Yun Shishir still had some lingering fears. Last time, in the gym at home, she wanted to put away the dumbbells Lisa used for training. In the end, when she bent down to pick them up, she almost sprained her back. So heavy. From then on, she didn't dare to pick up any of Lisa's fitness equipment. If he wasn't careful, his waist would really sprain. Hua Jin muttered, that's a little too scary. Yun Shishir was rather curious. I'm thinking, if Yaja were to play volleyball with Gu Jinglian, who would win? Hua Jin looked at Mu Yaja and then at Gu Jinglian. He said weakly, brother-in-law is definitely the best. Oh, do you think so too? Mu Yaja could tell that Hua Jin's survival instincts were playing tricks on him. Hua Jin immediately expressed his sincerity. Of course, I really believe so. Mu Yaja couldn't help but laugh. He said calmly, I've never played with Gu Jinglian before, but I don't think he's afraid of me. The match had been going on for half an hour. Lisa and Chu Ho were gradually showing signs of fatigue. After such a long time of exhaustion, their bodies were made of flesh and blood, not metal. Their stamina was depleted very quickly. Xiao Yichen stopped the match. At this stage of the match, it was obvious who would win and who would lose. Although the scores were about the same, Chu Ho's stamina was obviously running out. Chapter 4175. When Chu Ho heard this, he was indignant, but he still stopped the match. It had to be said that Lisa's stamina was amazing. Before the match, she had already played half the match and had not rested in between. It was not easy for her to fight like this. Xiao Yichen had just walked to Lisa's side when Gu Jinglian suddenly said, why don't we have a match? Xiao Yichen looked around him and confirmed that Gu Jinglian was challenging him to a match. He was dumbfounded. Are you serious? When Gu Jinglian heard this, he said, are you scared? No. Xiao Yichen furrowed his brows in embarrassment and said, I'm afraid that you'll lose face if you lose to me. Gu Jinglian's face immediately turned pale. When Chu Ho heard this, he was overjoyed. This sentence sounded arrogant, but Xiao Yichen looked really embarrassed, as if he was really worried that Gu Jinglian would lose face if he lost to him. Gu Jinglian was speechless and said, how can you be so sure that I'll lose to you? Because, it's true, Xiao Yichen said hesitantly, I don't know how to fix a match. Yu said solemnly, if Xiao Yichen plays, the volleyball will probably explode. Lisa nodded as well. The three children looked at Gu Jinglian sincerely, as if they were thinking about him. When he said this, Gu Jinglian felt very awkward. He was a grown man, yet he had to let a child go easy on him. He said angrily, "You don't have to go easy on me. I might not lose if I play against you." "This isn't a good idea?" Xiao Yichen scratched his head in embarrassment and said, You really can't beat me. If I hurt you, Daddy will say that I'm causing trouble again." He did not know that Mu Yaja was standing not far away. When Mu Yaja heard his son say that, he secretly said, "It's okay, Daddy won't scold you. Trample on him." Yun Shirshir glanced at her man coldly. Why did he become so childish at this time? Gu Jinglian was unwilling to give up. He felt that he was being looked down upon by these three children, so he insisted on having a go. "Let's just play one round then." In the worst-case scenario, he would not use as much force. Xiao Yichen picked up the ball and served it casually. Gu Jinglian was displeased when he saw that Xiao Yichen did not receive the ball. "Are you looking down on me?" "No, I was afraid that you wouldn't be able to connect it." Gu Jinglian's lips twitched again. "Play well for me." As he spoke, he served a powerful ball. When Xiao Yichen saw that Gu Jinglian was serious, he quickly became serious. He rushed forward, jumped up, and spiked the ball beautifully. He immediately hooked the ball into the net. Gu Jinglian rushed forward and saved the ball. The two of them gradually got into a heated match. Yu muttered speechlessly at the side, "Why is he acting like a child when he's already an adult?" Lisa panted for a moment before she finally managed to catch her breath. Chu Ho, who was beside her, was so tired that she squatted on the ground. She had not exercised so much in a long time. Her heartbeat could not keep up and she was perspiring all over. However, she truly felt that Lisa's skills were formidable. What was even more impressive was that this little girl already had such terrifying strength at such a young age. It was obvious that she had received professional training. She was young, but her skills were not yet mature. How scary. Chapter 4176. Just as everyone was engrossed in watching the match, Xiao Yichen jumped and spiked the ball. Gu Jinglian reached out to catch the ball, but at that moment, he felt a spark of electricity and he couldn't help but withdraw his hand. This was the body's self-defense mechanism. No matter how strong the ball was, if he were to receive it, he would probably dislocate his shoulder or break his bones. The body had a self-defense mechanism. Gu Jinglian instinctively felt that there was no way he could receive the ball, so he instinctively withdrew his hand. The ball immediately bounced onto the cement beside him. There was a loud bang, followed by the sound of an explosion. The volleyball rolled onto the sand, but it was obviously deflated. It exploded. This was the first time Chu Ho had seen the ball explode from a child. He was stunned. Gu Jinglian was also stunned. He knew that Xiao Yichen was very good and strong, but he had never imagined that Xiao Yichen's strength was so terrifying. Yun Shirshir and Hua Jin were also stunned. The whole world seemed to have returned to silence. Xiao Yichen looked at the broken volleyball regretfully. His gaze fell on Gu Jinglian, but he saw that the man was still standing there expressionlessly. He only harumphed and said, "Not bad, I lost." Wow. Xiao Yichen stared at the man in front of him in disbelief. He had never thought that Gu Jinglian would admit defeat. Only Chu Ho and Yu saw that Gu Jinglian's hand, which was hidden behind his back, was trembling slightly. His wrist was obviously swollen. Chu Ho walked over and carefully probed, "Your hand is swollen, sure." Gu Jinglian glanced at him. "Give me some face." This man, at such a critical moment, he was still thinking about face. However, on second thought, it was human nature. Although he admitted defeat, he couldn't let the other party feel that he had lost too badly. A 1.8-meter tall man playing volleyball with a child's size ended up straining his wrist. He would feel embarrassed if he told others about it. Gu Jinglian wanted to save face. "You should be okay, right? It's just swollen. It's fine." Xiao Yichen, "Can you?" Lisa looked dejectedly at the ball that was slowly deflating. "Can't you hit it more gently? My only volleyball is broken. What am I going to play in the future?" Xiao Yichen said angrily, "Buy more." "That's easy for you to say. Do they sell volleyball on this island?" "Yes, Yu said. There's a convenience store near the hotel that sells beach volleyball. Xiao Yichen said embarrassedly, Lisa, don't be angry. I'll compensate you. Xiao Yichen patiently coaxed Lisa while Gu Jinglian and Chu Ho exchanged glances. Were these two children the reincarnation of monsters? So strong. They were too violent. It had to be said that Xiao Yichen and Lisa were inexplicably compatible. They were equally violent and had monstrous strength. Chu Ho and Gu Jinglian respectively experienced the terrifying strength of the two children. Then they looked at Xiao Bao, who was stunned. Chu Ho didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Xiao Bao had already seen what was going on. Meanwhile, Lin Shi's mind was almost stuck as he watched the scene unfold. Fortunately, he had withdrawn from the game in time. He also had reason to believe that Lisa had really given in when they were fighting. Otherwise, he would have lost even more miserably. Even though he was unwilling to admit defeat, he had to admit defeat. Chapter 4177. Of course, they could not play volleyball. It happened to be dinner time, so Gu Jinglian booked a candlelight dinner and planned to relive the sweetness of their marriage with Chu Ho. At dusk, the beach, the setting sun, the candlelight, and the classic foie gras filet mignon quietly waited for the arrival of the night. Such a scene was very beautiful just by imagining it. Gu Jinglian had put a lot of thought into this trip. Since they were on vacation, they had to do everything perfectly. He was a perfectionist. Therefore, as long as he wanted to do something well, there was no excuse or reason why he couldn't do it well. Chu Ho, on the other hand, had put a lot of thought into him. When the candlelight dinner was ready, Chu Ho was still worrying about what delicious food there was on the island. She was hungry, and her head was full of steak and hamburgers. Gu Jinglian sent the two children to other restaurants on the island to eat with the bodyguards. Then, he happily prepared to have a candlelight dinner with Chu Ho. Lin Shi knew his intentions, so she did not say anything and promised to take good care of Xiao Bao. Then she held Xiao Bao's hand and walked away, coaxing and cajoling her. Gu Jinglian was looking forward to the romantic candlelight dinner. He said that he wanted to give Chu Ho a surprise, but just now, he held her hand and walked to the beach. Chu Ho saw the small dining table from afar. It was only big enough for two people to sit face to face, and there were snacks and beautiful candlesticks on the table. Chu Ho widened her eyes in surprise. This is a candlelight dinner. Gu Jinglian looked at her affectionately. Do you like it? Chu Ho was stunned for a moment, then she turned around and looked up at him. She smiled and squinted her eyes. I like it. She tiptoed, put her arms around his shoulders, and planted a kiss on his cheek. Although this man was always disliked by her for not being romantic enough, occasionally, he would deliberately create a romantic surprise. She had also fantasized about their romantic honeymoon. Although it had been delayed a lot, it did not stop her from looking forward to their honeymoon. Gu Jinglian held her hand and sat down. After the two of them sat down, the candlelight dinner officially began. Just as the main course was being served one after another, Gu Jinglian suddenly caught a whiff of smoke. After him, Chu Ho also caught a whiff of smoke. Gu Jinglian did not know where the smoky smell came from at first. It was the unique smoky smell of barbecue. The smoky smell was mixed with the aroma of barbecued meat. He frowned slightly and looked in the direction of the smoke, only to find that there was a nervous voice coming from the courtyard that was only a wall away from his villa. Ah no, it's too hot. It's burnt. It seems to be on fire. From the voice, it seemed to be Yun Shishir's voice. Then, Xiao Yichen and Lisa's voices could be heard. I told you that you put too much oil on it, but you didn't believe me. It's easy to catch fire like this. Oh no, it's burnt. It's probably inedible. Throw it aside. Sob, sob, my chicken skewers. You still have the nerve to sob. If you didn't put so much oil on it, who would be burnt? It's my first time barbecuing. Gu Jinglian was speechless. These guys were actually barbecuing at the seaside. Moreover, this group of fellows actually made the smoke so big that it spread to the walls of his courtyard. He was eating Western food. They were getting married. The barbecue next door was a mess. Chapter 4178. Gu Jinglian was so angry that he was about to explode. Chu Ho also knew that the smell of smoke was probably coming from next door. It seemed that she could also vaguely smell the oysters. She was a little hungry, but when she realized that Gu Jinglian was looking at her meaningfully, she immediately smiled and said, "It's okay. We'll eat our food. It won't affect us." "It won't affect us?" Gu Jinglian narrowed his eyes and was a little unhappy. The smell of their smoke had already drifted to his nose. How could this not affect them? Were they deliberately causing trouble? Gu Jinglian's expression became more and more ugly. When Chuho saw this, she said helplessly, "Don't spoil the mood. I think the atmosphere of barbecued barbecue is quite good." "Then you think that a candlelight dinner is not as good as a barbecued barbecue?" Chuho simply remained silent. It was obvious that Gu Jinglian's rare good mood had been ruined by the smell of smoke. It felt like Gu Jinglian and Muyaja were two men eyeing each other covetously. After all, two tigers could not live on the same mountain. Chuho did not want to cause any trouble, so she carefully comforted him. "Don't be angry. I've already felt your intentions. Nothing is absolutely perfect, but—" Gu Jinglian put down his knife and fork with a livid expression. Chuho did not dare to speak. At this moment, Gu Jinglian suddenly heard Xiaobao's noisy voice from next door. "This is delicious. What is this?" "This is a scallop." It seemed to be Lin Shi's voice. Gu Jinglian's expression was one of disbelief. Why did Lin Shi and Xiaobao's voices appear next door? What was going on? Chuho was also a little surprised. "Didn't you say that Xiaobao and Lin Shi have already settled down and are going to the restaurant on the island for dinner?" Gu Jinglian stood up in confusion and walked towards the source of the sound. When Chuho saw him stand up, he immediately got up and followed closely behind. The two villas were separated by a snow-white railing. Through the fence, one could see the scene in the private courtyard opposite. Gu Jinglian walked over and was speechless when he saw Xiaobao and Lin Shi, the two clowns, jumping around the 3 barbecue grills. The yard was very big, so it was more than enough to set up 3 barbecue grills. It was Xiaobao's first time cuffing barbecue, so he was very excited. In order to prepare for the barbecue, Muyaja and Yun Shirshir spent the whole afternoon preparing and finally finished. Other than some vegetarian dishes, there were also beef, bacon, pork, and most of the ingredients were seafood. Living by the sea, eating by the sea. The seafood here was caught by the local fishermen of Saipan, so it was very fresh. The seafood that was cuffed was very plump and tender. Chu Ho walked to Gu Jinglian's side and followed his gloomy gaze. She immediately saw Xiaobao and Lin Shi's figures, and the corners of her mouth twitched slightly. Gu Jinglian was angry. "Gu Qingza!" He roared angrily. Xiaobao, who was separated by a fence, shuddered and immediately stood at attention. He subconsciously looked around and did not know where the sound came from. It was not until Lin Shi saw Gu Jinglian's figure that he tugged at the corner of his shirt and pointed in the direction that he saw Gu Jinglian. Gu Jinglian's face darkened even more. How could he have given birth to such a stupid son? "Dad!" Xiaobao waved at him. "Come on, let's play together." Gu Jinglian's face turned even paler. Chapter 4179. Compared to Xiaobao's excitement, Lin Shi felt inexplicably uneasy. He had a feeling that Gu Jinglian's expression was not good. He was sensitive enough to sense that his father did not seem to like Uncle Muyaja very much. Originally, he and Xiaobao had been taken out to eat at a restaurant on the island, but when they passed by Muyaja's private villa, they bumped into Yun Shirshir. Yun Shirshir warmly invited him and Xiaobao to barbecue. He had never barbecued barbecue before, so he couldn't resist the temptation and agreed. In the end, he was so happy that he forgot about home. He didn't expect that he would be lured here. Yun Shirshir saw that Lin Shi and Xiaobao were standing still. She followed their gaze and saw Gu Jinglian and Chu Ho's voices. She smiled and walked over. She looked at Chu Ho and then at Gu Jinglian. She smiled and said, "Do you want to join us?" Chu Ho was just about to nod. She also wanted to barbecue. Most importantly, the aroma of the barbecue was too tempting. It would have been better if they didn't come closer. Once they came closer, the aroma made it impossible for them to resist. However, whether they could join them or not depended on whether Gu Jinglian was willing to do so. She looked up at Gu Jinglian. Gu Jinglian's expression softened a little. If Mu Yaja had come over and asked him if he wanted to join them, he would have rejected him firmly and rolled his eyes at him. However, the person who came was Yun Shirshir. He had always been very gentlemanly towards women. Hence, he felt that he would not give other women too much of a hard time. He declined politely, "No need." Yun Shirshir felt that it was a pity. But isn't it fun to be together as a family? Besides, Xiao Bao and Lin, she also want to barbecue with you guys. Gu Jinglian's gaze was slightly stunned. He looked at Xiao Bao and Lin Shi, who were not far away, but saw that the two of them couldn't help but cast their hopeful gazes on him. Their faces were full of anticipation. Chu Ho couldn't bear it and sighed. "Let's go together. Xiao Bao and Lin Shi want us to join them." Gu Jinglian and Chu Ho looked at each other and finally bit the bullet and agreed. He entered the courtyard. At this time, Yun Shirshir had someone set up a barbecue grill. Xiao Bao's him. Gu Jinglian didn't even look at him and reached out his hand to grab him by the ear. Ouch! Xiao Bao furrowed his brows in pain and his shoulders slumped. "Didn't I tell you to eat?" Gu Jinglian snapped. "What are you doing here?" Xiao Bao pouted guiltily and said pitifully, "I want to eat barbecue. I don't want to eat alone. It's so much fun to have a barbecue with so many people." "What do you mean by eating alone? Didn't Lin Shi accompany you?" Xiao Bao snorted. "He doesn't count." Lin Shi was speechless. Why didn't he count? Yun Shirshir walked over and said, "It's fun for children to gather together. Look, there are 4 or 5 children here. If they're together, they won't be lonely." Chu Ho was very touched. His impression of Yun Shirshir immediately improved. He could tell that Yun Shirshir really liked children. Her gentleness towards Xiao Bao and Lin Shi was definitely not just superficial. Most importantly, she was also very patient with children. Xiao Bao also liked Yun Shirshir very much. Lin Shi also liked her very much. Most importantly, that girl was also there. Lin Shi looked in one direction from time to time. That was where Natalia was standing. Chapter 4180. Natalia stood beside Hua Jin and watched him grill the oysters. She was obviously craving them, but she still pretended to be reserved. For some reason, she vaguely felt that someone was looking at her. Natalia's sixth sense was extremely sharp. She turned her head in surprise and saw Lin Shi's gaze on her. She frowned and opened her mouth, but hesitated to speak. Hua Jin saw that she was absent-minded, but he saw that she was looking somewhere else, so he followed her gaze. He saw that Lin Shi kept looking in her direction. Hua Jin's lips twitched. Why does he keep staring at me? Natalia wasn't used to it. She put her arms around her shoulders. It felt weird to be stared at like this. Hua Jin couldn't help but tease her. Because our Natalia is pretty and boys like her. I don't want him to like me. Natalia awkwardly hid behind Hua Jin. At the same time, Yu, who was standing at the side, also noticed the man's deep and meaningful gaze on Natalia. He frowned slightly and couldn't help but feel a little unhappy. He put down the ingredients in his hand and walked to Lin Shi's side. He purposely knocked Lin Shi's shoulder to the side. Lin Shi came back to his senses and looked at Yu, who had appeared behind him without him noticing. What's wrong? Why are you in a daze? Yu glanced at the scallop in his hand. Are your scallops almost burnt? Huh. Gu Linshi quickly lowered his head and looked at the scallop in his hand. Indeed, because it hadn't been taken care of for a long time, it already smelled a little burnt. No. Gu Linshi quickly put the scallop aside with a pair of tongs, feeling a little lonely. Sigh, it burned again. He couldn't remember how many scallops it was, but it should be the third one. Scallops were really difficult to grill. It was easy to see other people grilling them, but it wasn't easy to grill them yourself. It's burnt again. Yun Shirshir walked over, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. How did it get burnt? Before Gu Linshi could say anything, Yu said coldly, because I was daydreaming. In a daze? Yun Shirshir laughed and said, if you're in a daze, it's easy to burn. Got it. I'll be more careful next time. Gu Linshi explained, I was distracted and didn't pay attention, so, it's okay. There are many oysters and scallops here. Remember, you can't eat burnt ones. You'll have diarrhea. Yun Shirshir walked to the side to check on Xiao Yichen. After Yun Shirshir left, Gu Linshi looked at Yu strangely. She felt that this guy had an inexplicable hostility in his eyes. Gu Linshi asked hesitantly, "What do you want?" "Nothing." Yu was obviously not friendly to him. It could be said that he was very cold. He turned around and walked away. Gu Linshi didn't know what was going on. He had a feeling that the boy had done it on purpose when he bumped into him earlier. But why would he bump into him for no reason? Gu Linshi couldn't understand. All of this was reflected in Hua Jin's eyes. Was Yu jealous? Moreover, the way he was jealous was cute. Hua Jin felt an inexplicable sense of accomplishment. Chapter 4181. Chu Ho felt that there was no need to set up a new barbecue grill. She walked to Lin Shi's side and watched him carefully brush the oil over and over again. Her interest was piqued. "Is it fun?" Lin Shi nodded from the bottom of his heart. "It's fun." The feeling of grilling barbecue by oneself was different from eating it ready-made. There was an inexplicable sense of accomplishment. Chu Ho also set up 2 skewers of octopus feet and started grilling them excitedly. Although the grilling time was not too long, Lin Shi had some experience. Chu Ho did not know how to grill, but he would still stand at the side and give pointers like an old man. Chu Ho laughed in her heart. This guy was too interesting. Actually, he was not that good at grilling, but he was here to give him pointers. He even acted as if he was good at it. However, Chu Ho was only criticizing him in her heart. On the surface, she showed her admiration for her son. Lin Shi, you're really good. You've learned how to grill barbecue in such a short time. If we go camping in the future, I'll leave the difficult task of grilling barbecue to you." Gu Linshi smiled. "No problem." He patted his chest as he taught Chu Ho how to sprinkle the seasonings. With the addition of cumin, salt, and pepper, a tempting aroma gradually spread. This strange aroma attracted all the little gluttonous bugs, especially Natalia and Yueyao. The 2 little guys smelled the aroma and surrounded Gu Linshi. The 2 of them were not very tall, so they had to tiptoe to see what he was cuffing. Gu Linshi had steak, oysters, scallops, and meat skewers in his hands. Natalia still had some self-control. However, Yueyao did not have any self-control at all. She just stared at the sizzling meat skewers without blinking. She looked like she was about to drool. Chu Ho looked at Yueyao's silly look and almost laughed. This little loli was really too cute. She stared blankly at Gu Linshi's actions as if she was frozen in place like a statue. Her eyes were dull but full of spirit, and her saliva was about to overflow from the corner of her mouth. However, although he looked silly, he was extremely adorable. She looked like a cute little penguin. Her small mouth was like a cherry, but it also seemed like it was made of sweet glutinous rice flour. In addition, saliva overflowed from her lips, giving her a crystal-clear feeling. He got closer and smelled her. There was a milky fragrance on her body. It was the most typical smell of a child. Chu Ho squatted in front of her and gently pulled her little hand. However, Yueyao didn't seem to be very cooperative. He even put his hands behind his back, as if he didn't want her to touch him. His eyes were still locked on Gu Linshi's body, full of yearning. Chu Ho couldn't help but ask Gu Linshi, "Are you done? I've been staring at you for a long time." Only then did Gu Linshi realize that the little guy was standing beside him. He saw Yueyao staring at him with his mouth slightly open, his eyes full of pleading. Chu Ho rebuked, "Did you just see it? I've been waiting with my mouth open for a long time." Gu Linshi asked, "What do you want to eat?" Yueyao didn't say anything. He opened his mouth and looked at him eagerly. Chapter 4182. For some reason, Gu Linshi suddenly had the urge to play a prank on her. He pretended to pinch a piece of meat, but in reality, there was nothing in his hands. It was just air, and he carefully brought it to Yueyao's mouth. Chu Ho saw this and immediately saw through Gu Linshi's little trick. There was nothing in his hands, but it was as if he was pinching something to feed her. This was obviously a lie. Did he think that Yueyao wouldn't see through it? In the end, Chu Ho was overthinking. Yueyao was only a few years old, so she was stunned by Lin Shi's trick. She saw Lin Shi bring a piece of meat to her mouth, but she didn't see it. She even moved her little mouth away. It's hot. Lin, she couldn't stop laughing. How was it hot? This guy wasn't stupid at all. He knew that freshly baked food was hot. Or was it that he was already injured when he went to steal food from Yun Shishir's place, so he learned his lesson? Lin, she pretended to blow gently, then said to Yueyao, "It's not cold anymore. Try it." Really? Yueyao still didn't believe him. After hesitating for a long time, she timidly opened her little mouth. Lin, she fed her the meat. Yueyao didn't even look at it. She opened her little mouth and bit into a ball of air. In the end, Chu Ho didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Yueyao didn't even look at it and swallowed the ball of air whole. In the end, she didn't taste anything and looked puzzled. Lin, she even asked seriously, "Is it good?" Yueyao answered honestly, "I can't taste it." Lin, she coaxed her again, "I'll give you another piece of meat to try, okay?" Yueyao became excited, "I want to eat meat." She clenched her fists and looked expectant. Her eyes sparkled, which made Chu Ho feel a little sorry for her. Lin, she grabbed another ball of air and brought it to her mouth. In the end, when she bit it, she still did not taste anything. She even chewed it seriously, but there was no taste at all. The confusion in her eyes grew even greater. Chu Ho couldn't take it anymore. "All right, stop teasing her. Look at how wrong she looks." Not to mention Chu Ho, even Lin Shi himself couldn't bear it. He felt very guilty, so he finally picked up a small piece of real meat and put it in her mouth. The meat was an octopus foot. It was cut into small pieces and was very tender and springy. The Yueyao had just changed its teeth, so the octopus foot was a little hot. However, Lin Shi blew on it and it was much more comfortable. After eating a few pieces of octopus feet, Yueyao smelled the tantalizing aroma coming from the barbecue grill where Yu was standing. She ran over to him and looked up. Gu Linshi looked at her and couldn't help but feel his heart soften. When his sister and brother grew up, they would definitely be as cute as Yueyao. When that time came, he would be a big brother. However, his sister was still too young now. She could only speak a little. He didn't know if she would be more like her father or her mother when she grew up. Chu Ho saw that he seemed to be thinking about something and couldn't help but ask, "What are you thinking about?" "Me." Gu Linshi came back to his senses and looked at Yueyao's back. He said slowly, "I'm thinking that my sister will be as cute when she grows up." "You must have been as cute when you were young. Everyone was cute when they were young." Chapter 4183. I was thinking that no matter who she looked like, she would definitely be very beautiful. Chu Ho looked at Yueyao's back and muttered, "She looks more like Dad. What do you think?" If your sister looks more like Dad, she might be even prettier." Gu Linshi disagreed. "Who said that?" "If she looks like Mom, she would definitely be very beautiful too. How can you be so sweet with your little mouth?" Chu Ho couldn't help but scratch the bridge of his nose. Halfway through the barbecue, Mu Yaja suddenly brought over a few boxes of fireworks. Xiao Yichen and Xiao Bao immediately got excited when they saw the fireworks. They didn't even care about the barbecue as they ran to the beach and circled around Mu Yaja. Mu Yaja quickly said, "Don't stand here. It's dangerous." What's so dangerous about it?" Xiao Yichen didn't think much of it. He could even casually throw grenades around for fun. Mere fireworks wouldn't scare him. "Oh, then keep an eye on your brother. Don't let him get too close, or else he might get hurt." "Okay." Xiao Yichen immediately took Xiao Bao's hand and walked to the side. Xiao Bao still wanted to get closer, but Xiao Yichen held him back again. "Don't get too close." Xiao Bao, on the other hand, had an incredulous look on his face. "Why not? If there's a problem with the fireworks, it will splash on you and then you'll be in danger." After Xiao Yichen explained it this way, Xiao Bao understood. However, he still couldn't suppress his excitement. He looked at the fireworks expectantly and said happily, "Fireworks, fireworks." It was the first time the children had set off fireworks at the beach, so they were inexplicably excited. Mu Yaja studied it for a while. The wind at the beach was strong, so it would be difficult to light it with a lighter. Therefore, he used the old method. He lit a cigarette and confirmed that there were no children standing around. Then, he lit the fuse with a spark and hurriedly retreated. 10 seconds later, with a whoosh, several meteors rose into the sky in a straight line and quickly disappeared into the night. There were a few more shio 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 sounds, and the fireworks continued to rise into the sky, but they did not disperse as expected. Xiao Bao was surprised. Where are the fireworks? Natalia and Yueao also looked around curiously. Generally speaking, when the fireworks rose into the air, they would definitely explode into several brilliant flowers, but now they couldn't see them. Just as the group of people looked at each other, there were a few walala sounds, and dozens of beautiful fireworks suddenly bloomed in the night sky. The falling sparks were like tassels, slowly spreading along the texture of the night sky. These were fireworks bought from a local Chinese vendor, and they were definitely of the highest quality. Therefore, the dazzling effect was indeed beyond Mu Yaja's expectations. He didn't set off fireworks at the beach, so this idea suddenly popped up in his mind. At that moment, the waves, the night breeze, the night sky, and the fireworks, it was a perfect match that couldn't be any more beautiful. Yun Shirshir stared blankly at the dazzling fireworks in the night sky, and for a moment, she forgot where she was. Things that were so beautiful that it took one's breath away could always make one forget all their worries. She quietly watched the bursting fireworks. Half of the night sky was almost dyed bright by the brilliant fireworks. It's so beautiful, so beautiful. Xiao Bao clapped his hands in excitement. Chapter 4184. Hence, even though the fireworks were over, he still wanted more. Is there more? He looked at Mu Yaja expectantly, his eyes full of anticipation. There's more. Mu Yaja continued, but there's something in the villa's storage unit. Are you willing to move it with me? Of course. Xiao Bao mustered up his courage and asked, can I light the fireworks myself? Mu Yaja rejected him without hesitation. Xiao Bao's face fell when he heard this. He was disappointed. Because you're still too young. Mu Yaja gave him this reason. Xiao Bao was even more disappointed when he heard this. He said indignantly, I'm not young anymore. I'm all grown up. Ha! Mu Yaja laughed when he heard this. How old are you? Xiao Bao didn't know how old he was, but he seriously counted with his fingers. Gu Jinglian stood at the side and looked at his son's mature appearance. He was furious. Didn't I teach you how to count? Aya? Xiao Bao scratched the back of his head awkwardly and said helplessly, I've forgotten how old I am, ha! Xiao Yichen couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. Xiao Bao thought that he was laughing at him. He was so angry that he dodged and shouted, Don't shout. Mu Yaja added, You still have the cheek to laugh? When you were my age, you couldn't even do basic arithmetic. Xiao Yichen couldn't laugh anymore when he saw that his father was undermining him. He smiled awkwardly and turned his head away. His father? Was he really his father? Was there a father who would undermine him like this? Xiao Yichen was very unhappy. He stood gloomily at the side and looked at Mu Yaja with resentment. Mu Yaja couldn't be bothered with him and said, I'll go get a few boxes of fireworks. You guys wait here. Okay. Mu Yaja went back to the storage unit and brought a few boxes of fireworks over. This time, Xiao Yichen said that he wanted to set them off. Mu Yaja couldn't be at ease with him, so he passed the cigarette butt to him and held Xiao Bao's hand as they walked to the side. However, Xiao Bao was unhappy. He pouted and said reluctantly, Why can he put it down but I can't play? Little Yichen laughed. I'm older than you, so I can set off fireworks. After hearing him say this, Xiao suddenly had an inexplicable longing. It's good to be older. I want to grow up too. Next to him, a man who had already grown up said faintly, When you grow up, you'll feel that being young is true happiness. Xiao Bao looked at Mu Yaja, who was sighing with emotion, and corrected him seriously, I don't think you've grown up. Oh? What's that? You're an elder. Mu Yaja's face froze and turned slightly pale. Ha! Xiao Yichen laughed out loud when he heard this. Daddy, he said you're old. Mu Yaja grunted and didn't deny it. I'm old. He wasn't an immortal who had to go through this path. Move aside. Xiao Yichen warned Xiao Bao. I'm going to set off the fireworks. Don't come near. Oh, Xiaobao stepped back and looked at him with admiration and envy. He thought that when he grew up, he could set off fireworks like Xiao Yichen. That was great. Chapter 4185. Cheers. Yun Shishir raised her glass and smiled. Her face was slightly red and it was obvious that she was tipsy. She looked at Chu Ho and Gu Jinglian and smiled. Are you guys making up for your honeymoon? You guys have to enjoy yourselves this time. Gu Jinglian smiled and exchanged glances with Chu Ho. Then, he raised his hand and clinked his wine glass against Chu Ho's. Mu Yaja and Hua Jin also raised their wine glasses. With a few clinks, the wine glasses clinked against each other elegantly. For some reason, Gu Jinglian, who was arrogant, would not have put down his pride and sat down to have a drink. However, no one knew what Yun Shishir said to Gu Jinglian when she walked over, but for some reason, Gu Jinglian smiled. Then, they sat down and had a drink together. Hua Jin sighed to himself. Why was Yun Shishir able to make people so happy? Unknowingly, the night gradually darkened. Gu Linshi carried Xiaobao back to sleep. Natalia and Yueyao were also sleepy. Xiao Yichen carried Yueyao back to sleep. Yu and Natalia also returned to the villa early. The entire beach seemed to be quiet all of a sudden. Only the sound of the sea breeze could be heard. Listening to the sound of the waves crashing against the shore and feeling the gentle sea breeze on their skin, they couldn't help but enjoy it. Yun Shishir said, I haven't enjoyed myself like this in a long time. Chu Ho was puzzled when he heard this. Now that you're not filming, you should have a lot of time to go on vacation. How is that possible? Yun Shishir said helplessly, Yueyao is still young. I don't feel at ease leaving her alone on vacation. Now that she's a little older, I'm afraid that she won't be able to acclimatize to a place so far away. Children her age are very precious to their health. When Chu Ho heard this, he said half-jokingly, most of the children these days are precious. At that time, when we were young, we never had such a good life. Chu Ho was immersed in his memories. I remember when I was young, the Duo family where I was born was in a state of war. There was constant internal strife, and the streets were filled with demonstrations and protests. There were also many military forces exchanging fire. I remember that in order to fill my stomach, I hid from those people and ate bread from the mud. Some of it was spoiled, but in order to fill my stomach, I did not care so much. Even if he ate like that, he didn't get sick. If he were to eat like that, how could the children of today survive? Yun Shishir did not think much of it, though. I can only say that your physique is good. Everyone's physique is different. In fact, many children in that era died prematurely due to malnutrition or poor soil conditions. It was just that no one knew about it. Now that the days were better, such things happened less often. However, the children in those poor areas still find it hard to eat and wear. Therefore, after Yun Shishir got married, she reduced her work. However, she focused more on charity work. There was once when Yun Shishir participated in a charity event and learned that 1,500 yuan a year could be used to fund a poor student's living expenses and tuition fees for a year. Hence, she decided to help 3,000 poor students in one go. Many reporters thought that she was hypocritical and was doing it for the sake of the Xinyu Financial Group's reputation. However, this was Yun Shishir's true thoughts. Chapter 4186. The five of them were enjoying the sea breeze as they chatted with each other. There was no deliberate attempt to find topics to talk about or maintain the atmosphere. Everyone was enjoying the sea breeze and quietly enjoying the tranquility of the night. Perhaps this was a vacation in the truest sense of the word. The five of them drank quietly as they enjoyed the sea breeze. They only dispersed when it was very late. Yun Shishir wanted to go paragliding on the sea. Chu Ho wanted to go snorkeling. Hence, the two of them agreed to meet at the beach early the next morning. Hence, Yun Shishir woke up early in the morning excitedly. She applied sunscreen, changed into her swimsuit, and went to the beach. Chu Ho was already there waiting for her. Yun Shishir was surprised that Chu Ho had woken up earlier than her. Chu Ho said, I woke up early in the morning. Why so early? It's my first time watching the sunrise at the beach. Sunrise? When Yun Shishir heard that, she was instantly envious. How could she have forgotten? Yun Shirshir said a little reproachfully, "Why didn't you wake me up? I don't have your cell phone number. If I knocked on your door early in the morning, it would be so awkward if I saw you guys doing morning exercises." Chu Ho was a straightforward person, so he said what he wanted to say. Yun Shirshir blushed and said, "Hey, don't talk nonsense." "What's wrong with that?" Chu Ho stood up and said, "The coach will be here soon. We'll just wait here for a while." Yun Shirshir looked at her body. Suddenly, she saw that she was wearing a one-piece swimsuit and was wrapped up tightly. She was a little surprised. "Why are you wearing so much?" Chu Ho said. What's the matter? Is there a problem with the swimsuit? You have such a good figure. Don't you think it's a pity to wear so much?" As she said that, Yun Shirshir said to Chu Ho, "I have another swimsuit. It's new and I haven't worn it before. Do you want to try it?" "It's okay. Mine is pretty good. Just give it a try. I've never seen you bare your body before." Ignoring Chu Ho's refusal, Yun Shirshir took her hand and walked towards the villa. When she returned to the villa, she opened the new packaging in front of Chu Ho and took out a swimsuit. Chu Ho saw that it was a floral design. "Broken flower?" She hesitated. Yun Shirshir nodded. "That's right. This one is very feminine. It's very pretty. I really like them, so I bought a lot of them in one go. Would you like to give it a try?" Chu Ho shook his head. "No, this dress doesn't suit me." The swimsuit she was wearing was pure black. She only liked this kind of plain style. This kind of floral series felt too girly. Chu Ho shook his head. "I don't think it's suitable." As Yun Shirshir reached out to lift her clothes, she nagged, "You have such a good figure. Wouldn't it be a pity if you don't show it?" As she said that, she lifted her clothes. The moment she saw the firm lines of her abdomen, she was shocked. Seeing her expression, Chu Ho also felt uneasy. "What's the matter? Oh my God. Is this your vest line?" Chu Ho was stunned. "I guess so. Didn't you give birth to 3 children?" "Yeah." "Then," Yun Shirshir said in a daze, "how did you recover so quickly?" Chapter 4187. Chu Ho thought for a moment and recalled, "I remember that there was always a vest. Even though I was 9 months pregnant, the vest could still be seen very clearly." Yun Shirshir asked weakly, "Do you exercise regularly?" "Then, how did you maintain your figure?" Chu Ho said, "I don't have much fat or excess flesh on my body, only muscles." Comparisons were odious. Yun Shirshir suddenly remembered that she still had a swimsuit. She rummaged through the drawers and finally found the swimsuit that she liked from the bottom of the drawer. It was white and didn't have too many colors. However, it was very simple. However, it was much sexier than the one that Chu Ho was wearing. "Try this one." Yun Shirshir said with certainty, "This one will definitely suit you better than the one you're wearing now." "Let's not. Don't you trust my taste?" Yun Shirshir complained, "I think this one will definitely suit you. Try it on." Chu Ho couldn't stop her from pestering him. Hence, he took the swimsuit and walked into the room. A few minutes later, the door opened again. When Chu Ho walked out in a swimsuit, Yun Shirshir was so shocked that her eyes almost popped out. Oh my God! As this swimsuit was a sexier style, there wasn't much fabric and it just happened to cover the areas that needed to be covered. Hence, Chu Ho's perfect muscles were fully displayed. Besides the vest, the most important thing was that Chu Ho really didn't have any excess flesh on his body. It was all muscle. The most important thing was that his muscles didn't look bloated. Instead, they had a very fine line, especially his Apollo's belt, which was partially visible. As he walked, every line of his muscles made one feel suffocated with envy. Chu Ho felt a little uncomfortable being stared at by her. She put her hands on her shoulders to protect herself. To her, this swimsuit seemed too revealing. Yun Shirshir slapped her hand away. "Don't block it. Why don't you show off your figure? Like me, if I had such a good figure, I would wake up laughing in my dreams." Chu Ho frowned and asked, "Is there a mirror?" "What happened? Why do I feel like my butt is completely exposed?" For some reason, Chu Ho felt like he was running around naked. Yun Shirshir said helplessly, "Of course not." She pushed her in front of the mirror. When Chu Ho saw herself in the mirror, she was shocked. Yun Xianxia muttered behind her, "You're a woman. Isn't it natural for women to love beauty? I always feel that your personality is too masculine, so you always dress very neutrally. Actually, this is called sexy, not revealing. Is that so? You'll be fine once you get used to it." At first, Chu Ho was a little embarrassed to go out. Yun Xianxia took her hand and pulled her out of the door. At that moment, Gu Jinglian had just walked to the beach. He had just laid out a mat and was about to lie down to bask in the sun. In the end, Yun Xianxia took Chu Ho's hand and walked to the beach. Gu Jinglian caught a glimpse of them from the corner of his eye. He was so shocked that his sunglasses were crooked. He sat up abruptly and looked over. Only when he confirmed that the woman in front of him was indeed his wife, Chu Ho, did he believe that this sexily dressed woman was his wife. Why was she dressed like that? Gu Jinglian's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Chapter 4188. Chu Ho obviously did not notice his presence. At this moment, the coach in charge of the paragliding project had already arrived and was waiting patiently. When he saw Yun Xianxia and Chu Ho rushing over, the coach took one look and could not look away. Especially when he saw Chu Ho's slender figure and sexy figure, he could not even catch his breath. Although Chu Ho did not deliberately train after giving birth, her foundation was still there. She had been training since she was young, so her figure had always been very good. Therefore, even if she did not deliberately train, her figure was definitely much better than those women who trained in the gym. Compared to the intensity of her previous training, the gym was purely child's play. Until Yun Xianxia glared at him. "Coach, can we start?" Oh. The coach came back to his senses and immediately said in broken Chinese, Okay, you're always staring at her. Don't stare a hole in her body." The coach felt even more guilty. However, because of the sun all year round, his tan skin did not show any signs of blushing. Yun Xianxia secretly said to Chu Ho, "Look, you're dressed so sexy. She can't take her eyes off you." Chu Ho laughed helplessly. She looked at Yun Xianxia and her heart was filled with emotions. Other than Meng Qingxue, she did not seem to have any other female friends. Because she had grown up in a transcendent environment, she had a very masculine personality. She was straightforward and did not stick to the rules. Therefore, it was very difficult for her to get along with delicate female friends. However, Yun Xianxia seemed to get along well with her. Yun Xianxia's personality was very gentle. If one were to use an idiom to describe it, it would probably be that she was the kind of person who was tolerant of everything. No matter what personality someone had, she could always get along well with them. And to meet such a gentle friend, Chu Ho also cherished it very much. The coach asked, "Who's going first?" Chu Ho immediately said, "I'll do it." She wasn't sure if the project was safe. Moreover, she could tell that Yun Xianxia was a little scared and guilty because it was a high-altitude project. So, she took the initiative to suggest that she give it a try. The coach took out the safety suit and life jacket and taught Chu Ho how to put them on. Chu Ho was experienced, so he could put them on himself. The coach tied the rope around his body. In order to ensure her safety, Chu Ho grabbed both ends of the rope and struggled with all her might. With the strength of her arms, she could confirm that this rope was truly safe. The coach said, "When I tell you to run, start running. Do you understand?" "Yes, I understand." Chu Ho was well trained, so he answered very well and confidently. The coach held the radio and commanded the yacht to move. The rope was slowly pulled into the sea. When most of the rope was pulled into the sea, the coach shouted, "Run." Chu Ho gripped the safety buckle tightly and wanted to run into the sea. When she stepped on the water, the sea breeze suddenly rushed over. Accompanied by the huge dragging force of the yacht, Chu Ho only felt that her feet suddenly left the ground. Her whole body was pulled up by the umbrella and she flew high up into the sky. Actually, it was not considered high up in the sky. Compared to parachuting from thousands of meters in the sky during missions in the past, these tens of meters were not considered high at all. However, Chu Ho still heard Yun Xianxia's exclamation. "Wow, it's so high." Chapter 4189. "Wow, it's so high." Then, she couldn't hear anything else. The wind on the sea was strong. Without any shelter, The umbrella floated higher and higher with the sea breeze. The yacht towed the umbrella, and Chu-ho looked relaxed. With the sea breeze blowing and high up in the sky, Chu-ho didn't feel nervous at all. Instead, she felt free. She still remembered the first time she parachuted. She stood on the helicopter and looked down at the sky. Even though she pretended to be calm, she still felt uneasy and nervous. Parachuting wasn't 100% safe. The accident rate was also very high. Especially for newbies, if they didn't grasp the essentials, it was easy to fail the parachuting. Even if there were no accidents, they could still get injured. Not to mention other things, just the state of mind when facing such a high altitude was definitely something that ordinary people could understand. Xianxia stood by the sea and watched. Gu Jinglian walked over and looked at Chu-ho, who had drifted far away. He asked blankly, "What's that?" "That's an airship pulling an umbrella." Xianxia said nervously, "Why do I feel a little scared? It feels very high. Chu-ho has already flown so far away. I wonder if she's scared?" Gu Jinglian heard this and glanced at her disapprovingly. "Scared? What's there to be scared of? She won't be scared. She's so brave." Xianxia sighed from the bottom of her heart. She had seen many brave people, but she had never seen someone like Chu-ho, who was fearless in the face of any hardship. She was even braver than most men. 10 minutes later, Xianxia saw from afar that the umbrella was slowly descending on the sea. Chu-ho fell into the sea, but because of the life jacket, she floated on the sea. The coach went down the ladder and reached out to pull her. However, Chu-ho didn't grab his hand. She climbed onto the speedboat by herself easily. Soon, the speedboat flew toward the coast. Xianxia and Gu Jinglian heard the sound of the speedboat and looked over. They saw Chu-ho standing on the speedboat and giving Xianxia a thumbs up. "Great. You must try it." When Xianxia heard this, she looked at the high altitude where Chu-ho had flown. However, she still had some lingering fears. "Isn't it too high? That's impossible." Compared to parachuting, this height was already very friendly. Because it was a commoner entertainment project, the height was within the range of ordinary people. Chu-ho said to her, "At this height, I don't have to wear a safety suit. I can grab the safety buckle with my hands." The parachute had a safety clasp that needed to be held with both hands, but most people didn't have such a strong grip. When the coach heard this, he didn't think much of it. "How is that possible? You won't be able to hold it at such a high altitude. If you fall and fall from tens of meters to the sea, it'll be no different from falling from a tall building." Xianxia laughed and said, "Chu-ho, that's too dangerous." "It's true." Chu-ho said seriously, "When I used to practice parachuting, I was still a new recruit. There was once when my safety suit wasn't buckled properly and I fell in midair. I only landed safely by holding onto the safety clasp." When the coach heard this, he was shocked. Chapter 4190. If she wanted to make it to the ground, not only would she need an amazing arm strength, she would also need an amazing grip. This was something that even the top Special Forces soldiers would find difficult to achieve. How could a woman like her do it? Moreover, he had never seen a woman skydiving before. The coach thought that skydiving was Chu-ho's personal hobby, so he said, "Amateur skydiving is different from this. It's not amateur." As Chu-ho said this, he turned to Xianxia and said, "Don't worry. As long as the safety measures are taken, you will be able to take off and land safely." The coach still didn't believe him. Instead, he said provocatively, "I don't believe you just because you say so. If you're so capable, why don't you try it?" Before he could react, Gu Jinglian glared at him coldly, exuding a sharp aura. How dare he provoke him? The coach caught a glimpse of Gu Jinglian's sharp gaze and jumped in shock. He was slightly intimidated by his gaze. However, Chu-ho said, "Why should I try it? Why did she have to do meaningless things and take unnecessary risks for the sake of being brave? There was no need." The coach also felt that it was pointless. He said resentfully in decent Chinese, "Come on, come on." He picked up the life jacket and gestured at Xianxia. Xianxia was about to walk over when Chu-ho reached out and said to the coach, "Let me put it on for her." Earlier, the coach had secretly groped Chu-ho's chest when she wasn't paying attention. Fortunately, she reacted in time and blocked his hand. Fortunately, Gu Jinglian didn't see this. Otherwise, this man's hand would have been broken. Chu Ho was worried that Yun Shirshir would be taken advantage of, so she snatched the life jacket from his hand and said to Yun Shirshir, "I'll put it on for you." The coach saw this and became worried. "No, you're not professional. If you don't do it well, it will be dangerous. I know this better than you. I'm the coach. I'm responsible for your safety." The coach did not dare to take the risk. He had signed an agreement with the hotel. If the tourists who played the game in his hands were in danger, he would face the risk of going to jail. Chu Ho glared at him and said, "I said you don't have to be responsible, so you don't have to be responsible." With that, she turned around and said to Yun Shirshir, "Do you believe me or her?" Chu Ho thought that Yun Shirshir would more or less hesitate, but Yun Shirshir said without hesitation, "Of course I believe you." When Chu Ho heard this, he was slightly taken aback. Then he smiled in relief. There was a feeling of being trusted. It was a good feeling. The coach was still a little reluctant. He did not know what Chu Ho had done in the past or what he had experienced, so he did not believe him at all. Gu Jinglian, on the other hand, was impatient. He knew that this work was child's play to Chu Ho. Chu Ho was so insistent on taking safety measures for Yun Shirshir, so it must be for her safety. Hence, he waved at the coach impatiently and said, "I told you to get lost. Don't interfere and stop talking nonsense." The coach was intimidated by Gu Jinglian's authority, so he did not dare to rebut him. However, he still emphasized, "You have to be responsible for all the consequences of your actions." With that, he walked onto the yacht and tidied up the ropes. Chapter 4191. Chu Ho looked up in surprise. She didn't know how she had seen through her kind intentions. Yun Shirshir glanced at the coach and said helplessly, "I saw him trying to take advantage of you just now, but you blocked him, right?" She knew at a glance what Chu Ho was thinking. She was afraid that she would be harassed by the coach. However, Chu Ho was more reserved and reserved. She always did things quietly and didn't like to flaunt herself. Yun Shirshir was touched. Chu Ho said quietly, "It's okay now. It's tied up very well." With that, she retreated to the side and told Yun Shirshir, "When I say 3, 2, 1, and you hear 1, start running. Don't care about anything else, just run. Do you understand?" Yun Shirshir nodded seriously. "I understand." Chu Ho gestured to the coach. The coach started the yacht and drove away. The rope was slowly dragged into the sea. Chu Ho looked at the rope being dragged into the sea and started counting. 3, 2, 1. Yun Shirshir immediately followed Chu Ho's instructions and ran with all her might. Because she had to hold the paraglider, she didn't have as much strength as Chu Ho. It was a little strenuous for her to run. When she stepped into the sea, she suddenly felt her body float up like a hydrogen balloon. She screamed in shock and immediately felt herself flying into the sky. Yun Shirshir was so scared that her face turned pale. She closed her eyes and didn't dare to look anymore. Chu Ho said loudly, "Open your eyes." Then, as the water gradually rose, Yun Shirshir could no longer hear Chu Ho's voice. Finally, she gathered her courage and opened her eyes. When she lowered her head again, she saw that there was a vast ocean beneath her feet. The speedboat broke through the waves and the sea breeze blew the paraglider higher and higher. Her body swayed along with the paraglider. Then, she saw the beautiful horizon in the distance. The horizon and the sea seemed to have fused together perfectly. She couldn't even tell with her naked eyes which line was the sea and which line was the horizon. Turning his head, he saw that on another public beach, the yachts, the beach chairs, and the tourists were gradually becoming smaller and smaller. The paraglider took her to the public waters. When the tourists below saw her, they shouted and whistled excitedly. They were extremely excited. Yun Shirshir took a small breath and finally exhaled the turbid air that was stuck in her chest. What followed was an unprecedented relief. Although the safety rope was somewhat strangling her, it gave her a great sense of security. She shouted loudly as if she was venting, as if she was cheering him on. However, his voice was quickly shattered by the sea breeze. It was her first time trying such a high-altitude project, so she was both excited and nervous. She followed Chu Ho's instructions and held the safety lock tightly. Her whole body relaxed, and she floated freely above the sea with the parachute. 10 minutes later, the speedboat reached the shore. Yun Shirshir wore a life jacket and jumped down from the speedboat. She stepped on the water and returned to the shore. Chu Ho came up to her and asked gently, "How was the experience? Was it fun?" "It was fun." Chapter 4192. Chu Ho interrupted her. "But you did very well." Yun Shirshir's eyes lit up. "Really? Phew, that's good." Yun Shirshir patted her chest, still feeling a little scared. "Actually, I'm a little afraid of heights." "Afraid of heights?" Chu Ho scratched his head. He couldn't understand what a fear of heights was. This was because she had never been afraid of heights before. The first time she faced such a high altitude was standing on a helicopter. Facing a height of 2,000 meters, she was about to jump down. No one knew if there would be an accident. No one knew if she would survive. Yun Shirshir still wanted to continue playing. At this moment, Xiao Yichen suddenly ran over anxiously. "Mommy, bad news." Yun Shirshir saw his anxious expression and felt a little uneasy. She immediately walked over and asked, "What's wrong?" "Natalia has a fever." Yun Shirshir went to Natalia's room. In the huge room, Natalia lay weakly on the bed. The air conditioner wasn't on and she was even wrapped in a thick blanket. Yu sat quietly by the bed. When he heard footsteps, he immediately stood up and looked at Yun Shirshir. "Mommy, what's wrong with her?" Yun Shirshir walked to the bed and stretched out her hand. She saw a glass of water and a few pills on the bedside table. They seemed to be the fever medicine he had brought over. "What's wrong with her?" Yu frowned and said, "She seemed to be feeling unwell this morning. She has been lying in bed and can't get up." Uncle Huajin was a little worried and took her temperature. He found out that she had a fever of 39.8 degrees. 39.8 degrees. Such a high fever? That was quite a high temperature. Children weren't like adults. This temperature was already very serious. Yu continued. Uncle Huajin said that he might have gotten a fever because he was exposed to the sea breeze for too long last night. Natalia doesn't seem to have a good constitution. She gets sick easily, so she's probably suffering from the cold. How could this be? Yun Shirshir frowned. Yueyao was younger than Natalia. Even Yueyao was fine. Why did Natalia have a fever? Moreover, the sea breeze on the beach last night was not that strong. Moreover, the weather here was so hot. How could he have a fever for no reason? Originally, I wanted to give her some fever medicine, but I don't know why she has a fever. I can't give her medicine recklessly. So, let's go to town to buy some fever patches first. If the fever patches don't work, we'll go to the hospital. In the small town of Saipan, there was only a simple medical center. A proper hospital required a long drive to the center. Hua Jin thought that he would first use the fever patch and take some medicine to observe the situation. If he got better, then he wouldn't need to go to the hospital. The hospital was not a good place. Natalia didn't like it. It could even be said that she was repulsed by it. Hua Jin initially wanted to take Natalia to the hospital, but when the groggy Natalia heard that they were going to the hospital, she reluctantly kicked off the blanket in protest. She refused to get out of bed and follow Hua Jin to the hospital. Hence, Hua Jin coaxed her to take her medicine first and put on a fever patch instead of going to the hospital. Only then did she behave herself. Not long after, Hua Jin rushed back with fever patches and fever medicine for children from the medical center. Chapter 4193. He read the manual seriously but couldn't understand it no matter how hard he tried. Yun Shirshir panicked when she saw this. She immediately rushed forward and took the medicine box from Hua Jin's hands. She tore off the film of the fever patch and gently placed it on Natalia's forehead. She looked at the manual and took out 2 pills according to the amount. Hua Jin immediately understood. 2 pills at a time? Let's take a day's worth of medicine first. Do you want to go to the hospital? Hua Jin was a little worried. Yun Shirshir said helplessly, if you go to the hospital, you'll need to make an appointment if it's not a serious illness. I've already made an appointment. If you don't get better by tonight, We'll send you to the hospital. Hua Jin was about to nod when a weak and uneasy voice came from behind them. I don't want to go to the hospital. Hearing this, everyone immediately turned their heads towards the source of the voice, only to see Natalia weakly sitting up from the bed and glaring at them fiercely. I don't want to go to the hospital. Her voice was weak, but her tone was firm. Hua Jin immediately walked to the bedside and hugged her shoulders tenderly. He comforted her. Why don't you go to the hospital? We don't need injections, but if you don't feel well, you won't be able to go to the beach to play, right? When she heard that they were going to the beach, Natalia's originally gloomy eyes brightened a little. She looked at Hua Jin expectantly and mumbled, I want to go to the beach to play. When they came, Hua Jin had bought Natalia a cute life buoy and a beautiful swimsuit. He even said that he would take her on a yacht. If she continued to be sick, they wouldn't be able to go to the beach to play. Thus, Natalia started to hesitate. When Xianxia saw this, she squatted by the bed and looked at her seriously. She asked curiously, why don't you want to go to the hospital? Natalia was silent for a long time. She turned her face away but didn't want to say anything. When Hua Jin saw this, he immediately said sternly, Natalia, no matter who is talking to you, you have to look at them, okay? This is respect and courtesy. Xianxia smiled helplessly. She's already sick. Why are you still talking about this? Yu and Xiao Yichen looked at each other and immediately walked over. They said worriedly, Natalia, let's go to the hospital. Hurry up and get better, then we can go out to sea and play together. That's right. Didn't we agree to go snorkeling tomorrow? If you're sick, how are you going to go? If it weren't for you, we would be very bored. Natalia hesitated for a long time before she said in a lonely voice, Natalia suddenly said something that sent chills down everyone's spines. My sister said she doesn't want to go. Xianxia and Hua Jin looked at each other and were stunned. At the airport, Alice hurriedly took a taxi and rushed to the private beach. The taxi stopped at the entrance and she hurriedly paid the bill. At the same time, Xianxia had been waiting at the entrance for a long time. Earlier, Xianxia had asked Alice to come to Saipan for a vacation. Also, Alice wanted to observe Natalia's condition. However, when the plane landed, she received a call from Xianxia saying that something had happened to Natalia. Chapter 4194. By this time, Natalia had already taken the medicine under Hua Jin's patient persuasion. As the medicine took effect, she went to bed early to rest. The moment Alice entered the villa, she saw Hua Jin sitting by the bed with a solemn look on his face. He was looking at Natalia with heartache. What happened? Alice put her hands in the pockets of her windbreaker and walked to the bed. She glanced at Natalia and frowned slightly. What's wrong with her? Sure. Hua Jin gestured to the door and mouthed to Natalia, she's asleep. Let's talk outside. Alice nodded, turned around, and walked out the door. Hua Jin asked Yu and Xiao Yichen to look after Natalia in the room. He then followed Alice to the door. Alice lit a cigarette and stood by the bed. She asked quietly, something happened to her, right? Hua Jin nodded silently and sat down on the sofa. He asked hesitantly, does Natalia have an older sister? Alice turned around abruptly and narrowed her eyes suspiciously. Older sister? Yes. She said her older sister's name is Natalia. Natalia? Alice's face suddenly turned serious. She looked at Hua Jin. For a moment, her mind was filled with thousands of thoughts. She wanted to say something but stopped herself. Xianxia poured 2 cups of tea and walked over to them. She looked at Alice and said hesitantly, Alice, we seem to have discovered Natalia's second personality. However, we found something troublesome. What troublesome thing? Xianxia looked at Hua Jin. Hua Jin stood up, opened a drawer in the cabinet, and took out a crystal ball. When Alice saw the crystal ball, she was shocked. Hua Jin had mentioned the crystal ball to her before. When she saw the real thing, she was even more certain that this crystal ball was definitely an auxiliary tool used by hypnotists. Alice asked in surprise, did you steal this from Natalia? That day when we were on the trip, I was packing my luggage, but she kept holding this crystal ball silently. I asked her to let me keep it for her, but she didn't seem willing. However, when I checked in my luggage because it was a fragile item, it needed to be checked in. So, I had an excuse to keep the crystal ball in my luggage. When we arrived in Saipan, I lied to her and told her that I accidentally lost the crystal ball when I checked it in. Upon hearing this, Alice asked suspiciously, "Is she sad?" "No. That is," she was very anxious and restless. She didn't sleep well the whole night. Alice frowned slightly. She felt that there was something fishy about this. Hua Jin said seriously, "I observed for a while. I found that besides being inseparable from the crystal ball, Natalia has a more obvious characteristic." "What characteristic?" "That is, she can't leave the crystal ball. Otherwise, in addition to being anxious, she will also have trouble sleeping and eating. Last night, she fell asleep very late. When she woke up in the morning, I found that she suddenly had a fever." "Fever?" Hua Jin said again, "More than 39 degrees. So I asked the family doctor to come over, but he said that it was just a superficial fever." "A superficial fever?" Yun Shirshir was also surprised to hear the term body surface fever. Chapter 4195. Surface fever, as the name suggested, was measured based on the surface of the body. The temperature of the forehead or armpit was definitely above normal, but the temperature of the tongue was within the normal range. Therefore, a fever on the surface of the body was definitely an abnormal phenomenon. This temperature was not normal at all. In other words, there was absolutely no problem with her physiological temperature. Surface fever was mainly due to a lack of blood and qi. Insufficient blood and qi caused the metabolism of the blood to slow down. The low temperature caused the blood vessels to contract and the blood flow to weaken. At the same time, it could also be due to the poor blood circulation in the brain. It could also be due to excessive fatigue or excessive toxins in the body. In other words, poor sleep quality was the main reason. Poor sleep quality? Hua Jin said, "I lied to her that I lost the crystal ball. I could see that she was very depressed. She usually hugs the crystal ball to sleep, so I suspect that there is definitely something wrong with the crystal ball." Because he suspected that there was something wrong with the crystal ball, Hua Jin wanted to give the crystal ball to Alice to study. Alice took the crystal ball and observed it for a while. She came to a conclusion. "I guess that the crystal ball is the main reason for her fever. But this is probably just a guess, but I think that if there are no unexpected circumstances, this guess is enough to be valid." "What do you mean? You said that she usually hugs the crystal ball to sleep, but for the past few days, you hid the crystal ball and did not give it to her, right?" Hua Jin nodded. "Then, I guess that the other personality probably caused a psychological suggestion to the main personality. This psychological suggestion was guided by the crystal ball. The crystal ball is an important tool for hypnosis, so perhaps Natalia's main personality is being controlled by the second personality, and the second personality is using the crystal ball to control her." Hua Jin could not help but gasp when he heard this. The more he thought about it, the more terrified he became. He suddenly remembered that there was a gap in his memory some time ago. At first, he did not notice anything unusual. He thought that he must have been too tired or that his memory had deteriorated as he grew older. However, when he thought about it later, he realized that his memory had always been very good, especially when it came to memorizing scripts. He always memorized them very quickly and firmly. Later, when he found the crystal ball in Natalia's room, he began to suspect that he had been hypnotized by the crystal ball. He didn't know why, but he could vaguely see the shadow of another Natalia in Natalia. Sometimes, he would feel that Natalia was both unfamiliar and familiar at the same time. He felt like he had seen him somewhere before, but he couldn't remember where. It was like amnesia. Alice came to a conclusion. "I'm guessing that Natalia's other personality came out before this. However, that personality might know hypnotism and used it on you to erase your short memories." Hypnosis. When Yun Shirshir heard this, she immediately asked nervously, "What are the symptoms after hypnosis?" Chapter 4196. Some people will faint. Some people will feel very sleepy and want to sleep. Moreover, they will sleep very deeply and won't wake up no matter what. Yun Shirshir let out a short, "ah," and her expression changed. She suddenly remembered that day. In order to fulfill Yu Yu's promise to Natalia, Gong Fan had personally made the dessert table. However, he suddenly fainted. When he woke up, he said that he was very sleepy. She hugged him and coaxed him to sleep. However, he had not woken up until now. He had not seen Gong Fan for a very, very long time. When Yun Shirshir thought of this, her heart felt like it was being stabbed by a knife. Alice saw that Yun Shirshir's expression was ugly and asked worriedly, "What's wrong? Why do you suddenly look so pale?" Does that mean that Gong Fan was also hypnotized by Natalia's other personality? When Alice heard this, her expression froze. What do you mean? Yun Shirshir immediately recounted what had happened that day to Alice in detail, excluding the cause and effect of the incident. When Alice heard this, her eyes flickered and her expression became very serious. When Yun Shirshir saw that Alice's expression did not look good, she also felt worried. Actually, I have no way of knowing why Gong Fan hasn't woken up until now. I'm so afraid that he has disappeared from Yu Yu's body. However, I can't ask and I can't see. I can only live in fear every day. There's nothing I can do. However, just as you said, I thought about it carefully. Indeed, on the day that Gong Fan had a problem, Natalia was also there. The symptoms basically match what you said. I'm pregnant. Could he have been hypnotized by Natalia? It's not Natalia. Hua Jin suddenly said. Yun Shirshir looked at Hua Jin and heard Hua Jin say, "Perhaps it's Natalia. Natalia would never do such a thing. You don't know her well." No. Hua Jin's attitude was firm. It can't be Natalia. Otherwise, why didn't Natalia hypnotize me? Everyone fell silent. Alice always felt that there was something fishy about this matter, but she couldn't figure out what exactly it was. Her thoughts were in a mess. There seemed to be a flash of inspiration in her mind, but she couldn't grasp it. Gong Fan has never woken up since then? Alice asked again. Yun Shirshir nodded solemnly, her voice trembling. I miss him very much. For a long time, she suppressed her emotions and did not want to show them in front of Yu Yu and Muyaja. But she was also worried. Even though she kept comforting herself that it would be good for Yu Yu if Gong Fan's personality disappeared. Was this not what she had been most happy to see in the past? However, no matter how much she comforted herself, she couldn't convince herself otherwise. She was afraid that her indecisiveness would hurt Yu Yu. Could Gong Fan have disappeared? Yun Shirshir looked at Alice with reddened eyes, like a person in distress and despair. Alice stared fixedly at Yun Shirshir with furrowed brows, not knowing how to answer her question. She pretended to be calm, but deep down, she didn't know what had happened to Gong Fan. Chapter 4197. Separated by a door, Yu Yu stood in the room. Through the gap between the door and the door, he silently watched the dazed Yun Shirshir in the living room. His fingers trembled slightly. Yu Yu took a deep breath and turned around. He leaned against the door gently, his eyes filled with heartache. Gong Fan had indeed disappeared for a long time, but he didn't know why he had disappeared. However, he didn't know that his mommy was so worried about Gong Fan. She was probably afraid that he would be sad. She was afraid that he would think that her love for him was divided into two parts. One part belonged to him and the other part belonged to Gong Fan. Hence, she pretended to be calm, as if she wasn't that worried. Actually, she should be very worried. Yu Yu knew that his mommy had feelings for Gong Fan. He even noticed that during this period of time, every morning when she woke up and rushed into the room, she would see him. The dejection in her eyes couldn't deceive anyone. Yu Yu closed his eyes and muttered, "Gong Fan, where have you been?" However, deep inside his body, there was no sound at all. Gong Fan had disappeared. Yu Yu was feeling dejected when he suddenly heard Yun Shirshir's serious voice outside the door. "No, you can't take Yu Yu and Natalia away." When Yu Yu heard this, he turned around and looked through the gap in the door. He saw Yun Shirshir sitting on the sofa with a determined expression. "I won't let you take Yu Yu and Natalia away." It turned out that Alice had tactfully mentioned that she hoped that Yu Yu and Natalia would be taken away for some research. When Yun Shirshir heard this, she was like a cat that had been provoked. She immediately became alert and her attitude was resolute. Although she still maintained a calm and polite attitude, the resistance in her eyes was obvious. "No! she said firmly. I know that you're doing this for Yu's good, but I won't allow Yu to leave my side again. When Alice heard this, she sighed helplessly. She understood Yun Shirshir's concerns. However, she had reaped what she had sown. After all, she had hypnotized Yu and wiped away Yu's memories. Yun Shirshir was more or less afraid of her. If Yu were to be handed to me, would you also be worried? Yun Shirshir didn't speak. She bit her lip and clenched her fists. Alice said, as you said, there is indeed a problem with Gong Fan's disappearance for so long. I'm just as worried as you are. However, if we don't take Yu and Natalia back for research, I won't be able to find out what happened to them. I won't be able to determine what happened to them. Hence, I want to take them back for research. We can only find out what the problem is then. Moreover, I also feel that Natalia's situation is very dangerous now. I can't guarantee that. No. When it came to this topic, Yun Shirshir's attitude was as firm as steel. Alice immediately lowered her head helplessly and rubbed her forehead with a headache. When Hua Jin heard this, he was a little worried. You said that Natalia's situation is very dangerous now. What kind of danger is it? You haven't seen her second personality until now? Yes, Hua Jin replied honestly. Chapter 4198. However, Shirshir said that she suspected that Gong Fan had been hypnotized by Natalia's second personality. Then this proves that, Alice said slowly, this is a personality who knows how to disguise herself. In other words, she might have appeared before, but you didn't realize that she had successfully deceived you and hypnotized you while pretending to be Natalia's personality. Everyone fell silent. These words were a little scary when they thought about it carefully. If it was really as Alice said, if that personality was good at disguising herself, then it would be too scary. Hua Jin didn't know why, but he was a little lost. It would have been better if Alice hadn't said that. Now that she said that, he suddenly remembered that indeed, sometimes, when Natalia appeared in front of him, she gave him a very strange feeling. Now that he thought about it carefully, that personality might be Natalia, but she had disguised herself as Natalia. Perhaps he just didn't realize it. Thinking of this, Hua Jin couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. He suddenly raised his head and asked seriously, "Do you think that there is such a possibility?" Alice listened carefully. Perhaps Natalia's second personality has already appeared. Perhaps I've seen it before. However, she used this crystal ball to hypnotize me and Gong Fan at the same time. We've all forgotten that memory, so we don't know anything about it, and we don't know that she once existed. Then, is it possible that she used this crystal ball to indirectly hypnotize Natalia and control her so that she could freely change her personality? When Alice heard this, she didn't show too much surprise on her face. In other words, Hua Jin continued his analysis with Alice. Now that I've put away this crystal ball, Natalia has a feeling of anxiety. I've looked up information about hypnosis. If a person is hypnotized for a long time and the hypnosis is interrupted, the person's mind will become extremely anxious and reject the hypnosis. It can even lead to drowsiness, illness, and the deterioration of various immune systems. Alice nodded and felt that his analysis was very pertinent. I also have the same suspicion. So, because of this, I want to bring both of them back for observation for a period of time. Otherwise, I won't be at ease. However, as you can see, if I really bring both of them back, Shirshir won't be at ease. Everyone fell silent again. Not only Yun Shirshir, but even Hua Jin was worried that Natalia would be in danger if she was taken away by Alice. After spending some time together, it was impossible to say that Hua Jin didn't have any feelings for Natalia. He couldn't bear to hand Natalia over to Alice. It was too risky. His heart would ache. He couldn't even imagine Natalia being trapped in the laboratory and subjected to those inhumane experiments. However, if he kept Natalia by his side, he couldn't guarantee that Natalia's condition would be stable. What should he do? Hua Jin was also in a dilemma. He raised his head and looked at Yun Shirshir. He saw that she was in a daze, but he didn't know what she was thinking. Chapter 4199. Alice clenched her fists and suddenly looked up. Her expression was firm as if she had made a big decision. She said firmly, "Since you can't bear to part with Yu, then I'll come over." If Hua Jin doesn't mind, I'll settle down in his house. On one hand, I can take care of Natalia and observe her. On the other hand, I can monitor Yu Yu's condition. This way, you won't be separated from your son. What do you think? Hua Jin and Yun Shishir were in disbelief when they heard this. Especially Yun Shishir. She found it hard to believe that Alice would leave everything in Hurricane to take care of Natalia. What about your work at Hurricane? What are you going to do? What else can I do? I can only run from side to side. Otherwise, I won't be able to rest assured about Natalia and Yu. This is the only way. Alice said it casually. However, Yun Shishir knew from Gong Jie that although Alice was young, she had achievements that did not match her age. Hence, she had a lot of work to do at Hurricane. Was she willing to leave everything behind to take care of Natalia and Yu? Yun Shishir felt a little guilty. Hua Jin was also a little hesitant. Are you sure? I heard that you have a lot of work to do. You can't be running back and forth all the time, right? It's fine. Alice sighed deeply. Actually, I can understand Shishir. After all, Shishir is a little traumatized by my hypnotism. I understand that she doesn't dare to take the risk. But I can also understand you. But I'm still surprised that you and Natalia have such deep feelings for each other in such a short time. Hua Jin smiled embarrassedly when he heard this. He said helplessly, I just feel a little sorry for her. I want to give her a good childhood. At least, she doesn't have to spend all her time in the hospital. Upon hearing this, Alice's gaze warmed, but she couldn't help but tease. Are you being so careful because Gong Jie threatened you? I'm afraid that if I don't take good care of Natalia, Gong Jie will blame me. Hua Jin hesitated for a long time and had to admit, what? That's one of the reasons. Gong Jie said that if I didn't take good care of Natalia, he would kill me. It was as if a cold current had blown past. Alice and Yun Shishir looked at each other awkwardly and remained silent for a long time. They had almost been touched by the father-daughter relationship between Hua Jin and Natalia, but now, in the end, Gong Jie's threats were more effective. It was obvious that to Hua Jin, Gong Jie was a demon king. Even though he was afraid of Gong Jie, he still treated Gong Jie's words as an imperial edict. Alice resisted the urge to laugh and asked curiously, You? Are that afraid of him? You can't say that I'm afraid. Hua Jin said carefully. Then what is it? Yun Shishir and Alice asked almost at the same time. Hua Jin answered meticulously, I think it's respect. Respect. This word almost made Yun Shishir burst out laughing uncontrollably. Using the word respect was a bit too ridiculous. Chapter 4200. That's true. After hearing this, Hua Jin agreed that there was indeed nothing to fear from Gong Jie. Although his identity was a little shocking to ordinary people, once they were familiar with him, they would not be so fearful. But, for some reason, he was clearly hinting to himself that Gong Jie was just an ordinary person and there was no need to be afraid of him. However, every time Gong Jie stood in front of him, there was an invisible aura that felt like it was going to break his bones. Even if a person with a strong aura did not have any expression on his face, he was still imposing. However, for some reason, Hua Jin had an inexplicable desire to gossip about Gong Jie. Did you grow up with him? I guess so. When I met him, he was still a young and inexperienced teenager. However, after being in Hurricane for so many years, I heard his father gossip about what he was like when he was young. Yun Shishir was also interested. She and Gong Jie were separated when they were young and only reunited after a long time. Therefore, she was very interested in Gong Jie's childhood. What was Gong Jie like when he was young? Alice narrowed her eyes and frowned slightly. She thought hard for a long time but did not know where to start. How should I put it? Yun Shishir gave her a clue. When did Shao Jie return to the Gong family? Alice was stunned. After hesitating for a long time, she said, I remember old master mentioning that when Gong Jie returned to the Gong family, there was an accident. I think you should know about that accident, Shishir. Because of a car accident, when old master brought Gong Jie back, he seemed to have lost that part of his memory. He only remembered that he had an older sister. According to him, the rest of his memories were blurry. When he returned to the Gong family at a young age, he lost his mother and older sister because of a car accident. However, that accident was like a dream to Gong Jie at that time. When he returned to the Gong family, the little fellow did not know how to cry, nor did he know how to make a fuss. Later on, after a long period of hunger strikes, he became malnourished. Thus, he was put on an intravenous drip. Later, no one knew what Gong Xiaoying and Gong Jie talked about, but the two of them stayed in the study for the whole afternoon. Gong Xiaoying took a bottle of whiskey and gave it to the little guy. At that time, the attendants were terrified. The Gong Jie was a noble young master. There were many people who tried to stop the Gong Xiaoying from giving alcohol to such a young child. However, with Gong Xiaoying's expression, no one could stop him. She only knew that Gong Jie was drunk that day. He was drunk, but he didn't make a fuss. He just sat on the sofa stubbornly. His eyes were red, and his tears dripped onto the carpet, wetting his eyelashes. The more he drank, the harder he cried. He sobbed for his mommy and sister. Gong Xiaoying had no choice but to tell him the cruel truth. His mother was dead, and so was his sister. All of a sudden, it was as if the floodgates had been opened. The little guy cried the whole night. The next day, he started to have a high fever and almost contracted pneumonia. When the fever subsided, he finally woke up from his muddle-headed state. However, his temperament had changed greatly. He didn't like to smile, and he didn't cry easily. Chapter 4201. Yun Shishir recalled, when Xiao Jie was young, he wasn't that domineering. In fact, he loved to smile. I loved to see him smile. It was so contagious. No matter how sad he was, his smile would sweep away the gloominess in his heart. From then on, he rarely smiled. From then on, Gong Jie began to receive military training in the Gong family. Gradually, as he grew older, he began to stand out among his peers. Gong Xiaoying was proud of having such an outstanding son. When he reached adulthood, he gradually entrusted him with some of the Hurricane Group's affairs. Gong Jie was very capable. Whatever Gong Xiaoying entrusted to him, he would always complete it well. However, Gong Xiaoying obviously underestimated his son's ambition. As the saying goes, the younger generation will surpass the older. This saying was true. Gong Jie's ambition would only be greater than Gong Xiaoying's, not less than Gong Xiaoying's. The Gong family consisted of the main family and many other branches. In such a large family, it was inevitable that the juniors of Gong Jie's age would have their first awakening of love when they were young. Young men like Gong Jie were addicted to debauchery at that time, but Gong Jie had no interest in women. Did you know? At that time, Master was very anxious. He thought that his son's orientation was abnormal. That's why he's been hinting to Gong Jie to find a girlfriend. For some reason, Hua Jin's eyelids twitched violently when he heard Alice's words. He didn't dare to look into Alice's eyes. He thought to himself, could it be that Gong Jie really had no interest in women? Yun Shishir was also worried. I also feel that Xiao Jie has no interest in women, but that shouldn't be the case, right? A straight man like him shouldn't like men. After pausing for a moment, Yun Shishir changed the topic. However, even if Xiao Jie likes men, I will support him. As long as it's someone he likes, I will support him unconditionally. Cough. Hua Jin happened to be drinking water and choked at the wrong time. Yun Shishir looked at him and rebuked, "You can even choke on water?" "Nothing." Hua Jin quickly added, "I was scared by you. However, Gong Jie definitely doesn't like men." "Are you sure?" Alice disagreed. "Most of the men I've seen think with their lower bodies. Logically speaking, adult men should have physiological needs that other men have, right? Even if he didn't talk about feelings, it was too illogical that he didn't have a woman after so many years. Anyway, everyone in the Gong family thinks that he's abnormal. This might not necessarily be the case. Some men have better self-control." Alice couldn't help but say, "You really don't understand men. Could it be that you've never had a woman before?" Hua Jin looked away guiltily. He had a woman. However, he had never been willing to have one. Speaking of which, he didn't seem to have any special feelings for a woman. Lin Shuya was one thing. When it came to Lin Shuya, he only had a sense of routine. When he was on the same set as Yun Shishir, He had interacted with her a lot. He had thought that Yun Shirshir's ignorant feelings were probably just love. In fact, it was just a kind of dependence that longed for a family member. Chapter 4202. He treated Yun Shirshir as his own sister and did not have any messy feelings for her. Therefore, he did not really understand why those men had a special obsession with women. He felt that he could probably lead a good life alone. Yun Shirshir also agreed with Alice's words. Hua Jin, you think that you don't understand men. Most men, if they don't have feelings for women, they can also sleep on the same bed. They are different from women. Is this what you call a biological need? You can understand it that way. Yun Shirshir continued. Humans have 7 emotions and 6 desires. They are not gods or saints, so how can they be pure? Hua Jin's face turned even redder. Yun Shirshir did not notice, but Alice did. She felt that it was a little strange. She did not know why Hua Jin's face was so red. She did not think too much about it. Anyway, Gong Jie was obsessed with work for a long time. At that time, he went to a war-torn area like Africa without hesitation. He was young and frivolous, and he did not hesitate to go to a place where no one should go. He always laughed at me for being a workaholic, but when it comes to work, he is far more strict and serious than I am. Moreover, he is very domineering and stubborn. Once he has decided on something, he will not allow anyone to overturn it, not even master. I don't think Xiao Jie is very domineering. Yun Shirshir was a little puzzled. No matter what, he will listen to me no matter what I say. That's because to Gong Jie, you are definitely the most special one. When he has a girlfriend in the future, I might not be the most special one. When Alice heard this, she suddenly smiled, and her eyes revealed a look of envy. You know what? I'm especially envious of you, she said sincerely. Yun Shirshir heard this and was a little puzzled. But what do I have to be envious of? I'm envious of you. You've already achieved so much at such a young age. Alice couldn't help but smile bitterly. In fact, no matter how strong she was at work, Alice was still a woman. In the past, she had also yearned for love and family. She envied Yun Shirshir because whether it was Mu Yaja, her 2 sons, her friends, or even an arrogant man like Gong Jie, they all doted on her like a princess. She lived her life as a strong woman. Yun Shirshir, on the other hand, lived like a princess. No matter which woman you asked, who wouldn't yearn for it? If he said that he didn't yearn for it, it was only because he couldn't get it. Everyone was different. Yun Shirshir may not have a strong personality, nor was she the type of strong woman who could take charge of everything on her own. But because of this, everyone was willing to dote on her like a princess. She had a special quality about her that even she couldn't help but want to treat her well when she met her. It was probably because there was a kind of nobility in her bones. It was just that this noble temperament was very gentle. No matter who it was, she could get along well with them. She had no sharp edges and was as gentle as water. Even Chu Ho, who was born with a weak brain, liked Yun Shirshir. Alice yearned for a family, but the key word family was too distant for her. Chapter 4203. The topic of the 3 of them changed from Gong Jie to Alice. Yun Shirshir, on the other hand, was very curious. Half jokingly and half seriously, she asked if Alice had a boyfriend. Alice made it clear that she didn't want to get married. You don't want to get married? Yun Shirshir didn't look surprised when she heard that. Some women didn't like to get married, probably because they were disappointed in men and marriage. They didn't want marriage to restrict their freedom. Alice said frankly, actually, I have a lot of expectations for marriage and family. But this expectation is too heavy. I can't ask for it, so I don't want it anymore. But Yun Shirshir, on the other hand, could not understand what he meant. Logically speaking, those who didn't want to get married were usually those who had been hurt emotionally. Otherwise, they didn't have any hopes or expectations for marriage. However, as Alice said, since she had expectations for marriage, why did she insist on not getting married? Alice could also see Yun Shirshir's doubts. She took a deep breath and said calmly, I can't have children, and I'm destined to not be able to have children. In the past, I've thought about getting married and having a family. But because of my body's condition, it seems that it can't be realized. Since it can't be realized, I don't want to have any more fantasies. How can that be? Xianxia was surprised when she heard that she couldn't have children. She had never heard Alice mention this before. Now that she mentioned it, she was surprised. Hence, she felt a little strange. What happened? Alice didn't hide it from her. She said, I remember that it was a few years ago. Gong Jie came back from Africa and was infected with the plague there. I still remember that time in Africa. The plague was rampant. When Gong Jie came back to Hurricane, he was immediately quarantined. At that time, no one could do anything about this virus. In Africa, once someone is infected with this virus, they are treated like corpses. Many people who are infected with this virus are thrown into the quarantine zone like rotting livestock. Most of them starve to death before the virus takes over their lives. Starve to death. When Xianxia heard this, her heart couldn't help but clench. Of course, she knew that Gong Jie had recovered, but how did he recover? Xianxia faintly felt that it must be related to Alice's infertility. She used to pay attention to the news when she was in university, so she knew about the Amelia virus in Africa. Is it the Amela virus? Alice nodded. It was the Imanla virus. At that time, Gong Jie's infection had not been serious, but no one knew when it had worsened. Xianxia was suddenly enlightened. I heard that a vaccine was developed for that virus, but until now, the epidemic in Africa has not been controlled. Alice said, because the cost of the vaccine is very high, many places in Africa are relatively barren. Most of the war refugees don't have the means to be cured. Xianxia asked tentatively, this vaccine, was it developed by you? Then, Xianxia and Hua Jin said almost in unison, was it developed by you? Chapter 4204. At that time, Alice was still a young doctor. She was not an authority in this field. Therefore, she was helpless against such a plague. After Gong Jie and a few others were quarantined, the medical center of Hurricane was out of control for a long time. No one knew how terrible this virus was. It also meant that no one knew how long Gong Jie could survive after being infected with this plague. Many of the mercenaries who came back from Africa with him and were infected with this virus did not survive. Therefore, Alice was very nervous at that time. More importantly, in the end, even though the preliminary vaccine had been obtained, no one dared to put it into use without testing it first. No one dared to test it on Gong Jie's body. Therefore, at that time, Alice did not know what she was thinking. She appeared in the laboratory and calmly proposed the idea of using herself as an experiment subject. Everyone was overjoyed. At that time, Alice was still very young and had not entered Hurricane yet. She was just an intern in the medical center and was not considered an experienced doctor. Therefore, in the eyes of many people, she was worthless. However, since she was willing to use her body as the price, the researchers who were researching the vaccine were naturally surprised. However, Alice was also informed in advance that because the vaccine was the preliminary vaccine, once the implantation failed, the virus would backfire and her life would be in danger. Alice understood, but she was not afraid. She did not hesitate to use herself as an experiment subject. However, as expected, the experiment failed and the virus backfired. She was infected with the virus and was finally out of danger after a few days and nights of emergency treatment. However, because she accepted the human experiment without permission, she was expelled from the hospital. It was also because of the virus that she could not have children for the rest of her life. Because of the infection of the virus, most of the chromosomes in her body were destroyed. Even if she could have children, there was a terrible possibility that she would give birth to a deformed child. Therefore she gave up. You did it for Gong Jie? Alice suddenly fell silent. She pursed her lips and said calmly, you can think of me as the Virgin Mary. For the health of the world, I sacrificed my life for righteousness. She was so relaxed that it was difficult to see how painful it was to make this choice at that time. However, Alice did not mention that she was willing to do it for the sake of Gong Jie. She had seen Gong Jie before. Before entering the Hurricane, she had met him by chance as a medical volunteer in Africa. It was only this side that seemed to last for 10,000 years. She dreamed of entering Hurricane and becoming a member of the Hurricane Medical Center. However, as soon as she arrived at Hurricane, She had to deal with the news that Gong Jie was infected with the virus. She did it almost without thinking, even though she knew that this result was definitely not something she could bear. However, at that time, her head was hot and she didn't think about anything else. Gong Jie didn't even know about it. Alice also rarely mentioned this matter. Infertility was the result of a series of full-body checkups after her recovery. She couldn't accept it, but she had to. Fortunately, Gong Jie didn't have any serious problems. After learning a lesson from Alice, the vaccine was perfected. Therefore, Gong Jie recovered very well. Chapter 4205. This was enough to make Alice feel gratified. At least, Gong Jie was doing well. She liked Gong Jie. Although it wasn't love, this kind of liking was enough for her to give her all. However, she had never confessed her love for Gong Jie to anyone. It wasn't that she didn't think that she was worthy of Gong Jie, but she knew that Gong Jie had no interest in her. If the feelings of liking someone were not mutually willing, then it would only become a burden to reveal one's heart. Hence, Alice had never mentioned this matter to Gong Jie so that he wouldn't feel burdened. She also didn't feel that Gong Jie had to reciprocate her love and her efforts. This wasn't liking someone. This was kidnapping. This was extortion. This wasn't her motive, and it wasn't her style of doing things. Hence, she suppressed this matter in her heart. She also restrained her love for Gong Jie deep in her heart. Alice smiled. I didn't expect that my unintentional actions would indirectly save Gong Jie. It's really a coincidence. She pretended to be relaxed, but Yun Shershir's expression turned serious when she saw it. Although Alice didn't show any signs of regret, she still probed carefully. Actually, you did all this for Xiao Jie, didn't you? Alice was stunned and didn't say anything. She avoided Yun Shershir's gaze and said casually, No, I only did what I had to do. Because of me, the vaccine was developed and the illness was under control. As for Gong Jie, that can only be said to be a coincidence. Since she had already said so, Yun Shershir didn't expose her. However, she could see that Alice was restraining her love for Gong Jie. She was almost certain that Alice had ended up infertile because of Gong Jie. However, she could understand Alice's feelings even if she didn't say it out loud. Because, if it was a love that was destined to fail, once spoken, it would become a burden. Alice didn't want to put any burden on Gong Jie. Thus, she looked calm and collected, carefully protecting her last bit of dignity. She didn't want her liking to become a kind of demanding and pitiful. Actually, it's not a big deal to be infertile. Alice pursed her lips and said seriously, If there is a chance in the future, I can meet someone I like who also likes me. If he doesn't mind, we can adopt a child and treat her as our own. At least, I can fulfill my dream of being a mother. Even if she is not my biological child, I will still treat her as my own. She already had a plan. However, that was a matter for the future. Alice stood up and said to Yun Shershir, I'm going to check on Natalia. In this way, it could be considered as a covert way of avoiding the topic. It was obvious that she wasn't willing to talk much about this matter. Yun Shershir and Hua Jin also tacitly agreed and stood up with her. The three of them entered the room. At that moment, Yi was sitting in front of the bed and Xiao Yichen was leaning against the sofa. He was obviously sleepy and had fallen asleep. However, he was a light sleeper and had originally closed his eyes to rest. When Alice walked in just now, he woke up with a start. Xiao Yichen opened his eyes and saw that it was Alice and Yun Shershir. He stood up and said, Mommy? Alice, you're here too. Chapter 4206. How's Natalia? Yu said, her fever seems to have subsided a little. It's not as serious as before. Let me take a look. Alice walked over and took out her thermometer. She scanned her body and the temperature was 39 degrees Celsius. This meant that her fever was slowly subsiding. She relaxed her eyebrows. It seems that her fever is subsiding. Yun Shershir also heaved a sigh of relief. Hua Jin was still worried. Will it relapse? I don't know. Alice shook her head. My initial suspicion is that she has a fever on the surface of her body. There's no inflammation, no virus infection, and no signs of a cold or fever. I'm guessing that she probably hasn't slept well for a few days. Her body is weak, so it's just a fever on the surface of her body. She should be fine after more rest. Hua Jin was relieved to hear this. Yun Shishir asked worriedly, "Are you sure you're all right now?" 39. 8 degrees Celsius. This number scared me. Yu Yu's body was weak when he was young, but he didn't have such a high fever. Alice comforted her. "Don't worry, she'll be fine. If anything happens, I'll ensure her safety. Since I'm here today, I don't plan to leave. Don't worry and have fun. It's rare that you have a break, so you should enjoy it. Leave Natalia to me." Hua Jin couldn't help but feel worried when she said this. He said sadly, "I don't have the mood to play anymore seeing her like this. It's okay, I'll stay here to keep her company." Alice nodded. "Don't worry, she'll have a good night's sleep. If there are no accidents, her fever should be gone by tomorrow." "That's good." With Alice around, Yun Shishir was relieved. She noticed that Yu Yu's eyes were glued to Natalia, so she walked over to him and squatted down gently. She said seriously, "Stay here and take good care of Natalia, okay?" Yu Yu looked at her and then at Alice. Suddenly she said, "Since Alice is here, she will take good care of Natalia. I want to accompany Mommy." Yun Shishir was a little surprised when she heard this. She was not surprised that Yu Yu liked to stick to her since she was young. But at some point, Yu Yu also started to become independent. Slowly, she no longer relied on her as much as before. She originally thought that Yu Yu wouldn't bear to leave Natalia and would stay to take care of her. She didn't expect him to say that he wanted to stay with her. Yun Shishir couldn't help but laugh. "Mommy isn't sick. Why do you suddenly want to accompany Mommy?" "Mommy doesn't need Yu Yu to accompany her if she's not sick." Yu Yu suddenly stuck to her and held her hand. He snuggled into her embrace and said coquettishly, "I just want to accompany Mommy." It was rare for Yu Yu to act coquettishly. Whenever he acted coquettishly, it was as if he had returned to the time when Yu Yu was 6 years old. He wanted to stick to her all the time, like a little tail that couldn't be shaken off. Yun Shishir's heart instantly softened, and her heart collapsed. She gently lifted Yu Yu up. He was already more than 10 years old. When she lifted him up, he instantly rested his head gently on her shoulder, just like when he was young. Yun Shishir didn't know why, but she could sense a sense of helplessness from him. She was so sensitive. Hence, she felt that Yu Yu was in low spirits today. Chapter 4207. "It's nothing." Yu Yu's voice was muffled. It was not loud, but it sounded weak. "I want to be with Mommy." Yun Shishir's eyelids suddenly twitched. She frowned slightly. She could vaguely sense that Yu Yu might have overheard her conversation with Alice. But even though she had lowered her voice, Yu Yu might have heard it and kept it in his heart. Would he think that she was worried about Gong Fan and no longer regarded him as the most important person? Yun Shishir did not know how to comfort him. She hugged Yu Yu tightly and smiled at Hua Jin and Alice. Then, she carried Yu Yu and turned to leave. There was a long silence on the way back. It was only when they were about to enter the villa that Yu asked softly, "Mommy, are you worried that Gong Fan will never come back?" Yun Shishir was stunned when she heard this. It was only after a long time that she found her voice. "I'm a little worried. After all, he hasn't appeared for a long time. It's really strange. Mommy, if he disappears forever, please don't blame me, okay?" Yu Yu was a little helpless and said honestly, "I'm worried too. I'm afraid that he will suddenly disappear. I'm actually prepared to live with him, but I don't know why, but it's as if he suddenly disappeared and I can't find him." Yun Shishir did not know whether to laugh or cry when she heard this. Why would he think that? Why would you think that? Why would Mommy blame you for this? Yun Shishir knew that Yu Yu had found out about her worries and helplessness. He felt guilty, helpless, and uneasy because of this. She felt helpless. She had not controlled her emotions well and made Yu Yu so uneasy. "Don't worry, Mommy didn't think too much. Don't be sad. Besides, isn't it a good thing that Gong Fan has disappeared? Does that at least mean that you've recovered?" Yu Yu nodded gently. Yun Shishir carried him back to the room and comforted him. "Don't let your imagination run wild, okay?" "All right." However, Yu Yu was unwilling to return to the room. Instead, he said to Yun Shishir, "Mommy, I want to go out to sea." "Go to sea? Let's go out to sea with Daddy and Xiaoichen, okay? What about your sister?" Younger sister, she's seasick. Moreover, the wind at sea is too strong, and the sun is too strong. Younger sister's skin is so tender. It's not worth it if it peels. Yes. Xianxia asked Muyaja to charter a boat, and the family of 4 went out to sea. The journey out to sea took a full day. Lunch was also held at sea. Lunch consisted of freshly caught fish that had not undergone too much processing. Everything retained its original taste and was delicious. When little Yichen and Yuyu went out to sea, they sat back to back and fished by the side of the boat. Xianxia, on the other hand, hugged fresh coconuts and basked in the sun as she fell into a daze. When they returned in the evening, Xianxia went to check on Natalia. Fortunately, just as Alice had said, her temperature had dropped quickly. Although it had not returned to normal, it meant that she was getting better. Chapter 4208. After the holiday in Saipan ended, Alice went back to Hurricane to complete the procedures. For a long time, she had to travel back and forth between Hurricane and the country to monitor Natalia's condition. Alice settled down in the villa that Gong Jie had bought for Hua Jin and Natalia. However, after a few days of monitoring, Alice discovered something that could not be underestimated. That was, ever since she lost the crystal ball, Natalia suddenly became very anxious. At night, it was always very difficult for her to fall asleep. Even after she fell asleep, through the sleep quality test, she would always have nightmares. The continuous nightmares always caused her to be in a half-awake state, and the quality of her sleep would be greatly affected. Therefore, it indirectly caused her to be anxious. This meant that the crystal ball had a mysterious effect on Natalia's body. Alice hesitated for a long time and finally decided to return the crystal ball to Natalia. Before returning the crystal ball to Natalia, she deliberately installed a hidden surveillance camera in the room. The video was directly transferred to Alice's phone through the phone, so that her situation could be monitored 24 hours a day. At first, Hua Jin objected to the idea. He did not think that Alice could use the surveillance cameras to monitor Natalia even if she was in such a state. Even a person with dual personality had the right to privacy. However, Alice did not agree. She felt that the most important thing now was to find the connection between the crystal ball and Natalia. Hua Jin was convinced and did not interfere too much. So, Hua Jin found an opportunity and returned the crystal ball to Natalia under the excuse that he found it at the airport. Natalia hugged the crystal ball and couldn't bear to put it down. Even her mental state had improved a lot. Hua Jin saw that she hugged the crystal ball as if she had found her life again. He could not help but be curious, so he secretly asked her why the crystal ball was so important. Alice said, "At night, there will be a fairy in the crystal ball who will sing me to sleep." How is that possible? Hua Jin kept staring at the crystal ball, but he could not figure out anything. He was puzzled. Where is the fairy? Why can't I see her? Only I can see her. No one else can see her at all. This is a secret between me and her. A secret that only the two of us know. As she spoke, she hugged the crystal ball to her chest, not letting Hua Jin see it anymore. On the day that Hua Jin returned the crystal ball to Natalia, Alice turned on the surveillance camera. However, it was this surveillance camera that made Alice discover a very serious problem. She found that every day before she went to bed, Natalia would hold the crystal ball and stare blankly for half a day, as if she could see something from the crystal ball. But then, there was an obvious change in her condition. This state was not unfamiliar. Alice knew very well that Natalia had been hypnotized into this state. How could this be? This was somewhat beyond Alice's knowledge. Logically speaking, even if it was hypnotism, it still required the hypnotist and the hypnotist to work together. Not one of them could be missing. The crystal ball was nothing more than an auxiliary tool. Chapter 4209. What was even more surprising was that Alice finally discovered Natalia's second personality during the surveillance. Natalia appeared. It was early in the morning. Alice set an alarm to wake up. Usually, Natalia would wake up at 8 o'clock, but Alice would set an alarm at 7 o'clock. She would wake up early and pay attention to Natalia's situation at all times. She clearly noticed that the moment Natalia opened her eyes, she became a stranger. She didn't know that there were surveillance cameras in the room, and she didn't know that her every word and action was being monitored by Alice. Not to mention her, even Hua Jin didn't know where Alice had secretly placed the surveillance cameras. In fact, Alice had placed the surveillance cameras very discreetly. There were a total of 10 corners in the entire bedroom, and they were secretly placed with surveillance cameras. One of them was at the head of the bed, directly facing Natalia's face. When she woke up, she didn't have Natalia's usual eyes, but a pair of cold eyes that Alice had never seen before. Cold, dark, and without a trace of the mortal world. This must be the second personality that Professor Romanka had induced, Natalia. She first sat up from the bed, but she didn't put on her clothes immediately. Instead, she sat on the side of the bed for a while. Then she walked to the desk and sat down. Then she stared at the calendar for a long time. She seemed to be observing the date and something else. Alice looked at it seriously. She realized that other than the change in Natalia's eyes, there were more strange behaviors. Only then did she really believe that the person in front of her was Natalia's second personality, Natalia, and not Natalia. This at least proved that Professor Romanka's creation theory was absolutely successful. Even if a person had a normal personality, they could still create a dual personality through acquired means. This result almost overturned the understanding of all researchers. Alice got up. At the same time, Hua Jin had also gotten up and was preparing breakfast. Natalia's breakfast had always been prepared by Hua Jin. Seeing that Alice had woken up, he was a little surprised and asked curiously, "Why are you up so early?" Although Alice got up early, she didn't have the habit of eating breakfast, so she didn't go downstairs every morning. Alice said to Hua Jin, "There's a problem." "What happened?" "I have a feeling that Natalia might have switched to a second personality today." "Just pretend you don't know." Hua Jin was slightly surprised, but before he could ask anything, Natalia had already come downstairs. Alice still had doubts about whether the woman was Natalia or not, so she still had her reservations. She assumed that the woman was Natalia for the time being, but she was still suspicious. When Natalia came downstairs, Alice observed her closely. From the angle of the surveillance camera, Natalia was cold and indifferent. She didn't even look like a normal child. But once she came downstairs, she showed Natalia's usual innocent expression. "Morning." She walked to the dining table and sat down obediently with an innocent expression on her face. "Are you still having ham and bread today?" Chapter 42:10. I don't want to drink milk anymore. I'm tired of drinking milk every day. She said so. Alice instructed Hua Jin to prepare yogurt without batting an eyelid. She asked, "Is yogurt okay?" "Yeah, that's fine too." Natalia nodded. From her expression, it seemed that she was no different from her usual self. However, Alice felt a chill run down her spine. The Natalia in front of her didn't seem to be any different from her usual self. However, Natalia's cold gaze when she got out of bed still left a deep impression on her. Could it be that all this was her disguise? Alice couldn't help but suspect. Was Natalia a good actress? Hypothetically speaking, this was the case. Natalia was familiar with Natalia's personality in everyone's eyes. Hence, she would deliberately imitate Natalia's every word and action. She even knew what Natalia liked. Yogurt, ham, comic books, swings. However, when Hua Jin placed the yogurt in front of her, Natalia was obviously a little hesitant. However, after a short while, she picked up the cup and took a sip. She knew Natalia's likes and dislikes. Hence, she played the role of Natalia without batting an eyelid. Alice acted as if nothing had happened. She didn't want to make her suspicious. A day passed and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Natalia was obviously not close to her. After breakfast, she returned to her room. Through the surveillance camera on her phone, Natalia was sitting at her desk, obediently flipping through her comic book. She seemed to be enjoying it. She didn't seem to have changed much from before. Could it be that scene in the morning was her imagination? Alice wondered. Soon the day passed. Natalia went to bed early as usual. However, she keenly noticed that she did not hug the crystal ball before going to bed that day. Instead, she marked a circle on the calendar and went to bed early. Alice sneaked into her room while she was asleep. At that moment, the room was unusually quiet. Only the sound of Natalia's breathing could be heard. It was obvious that she had fallen asleep. After making sure that she was asleep, Alice flipped through the calendar. She was shocked to find that there were circles on the calendar. Not every day had one. On average, there were only 2 circles a week. At most, there were 3 circles. This phenomenon had existed tacitly for 2 months. Could she understand that this was a mark left by Natalia on the calendar? If Natalia was the one who woke up, she would leave a circle on the calendar as a mark. If that was the case, Natalia would appear about 9 times a month. These 9 times, however, Hua Jin did not notice it at all. Did this mean that Natasha's research was so godlike that even the people around her did not notice this detail? Alice couldn't help but feel terrified. So why did Natalia copy Natalia's every word and action? What was her purpose in doing this? Was to disguise herself? Could it be that this was a way to protect himself? Then, if the hypnosis was real, what was Natalia's purpose for hypnotizing Hua Jin and Gong Fan? More importantly, a child, even if it was a created second personality, what methods did she have to know hypnosis? Chapter 42:11. Before this, Alice had the habit of communicating with Hua Jin every day. Usually, it was over the phone to find out about Natalia's situation and changes. However, Hua Jin said that there was nothing out of the ordinary. That meant that there was a big problem. There were too many things that needed to be uncovered. Alice suddenly realized that Natalia might be hiding many secrets that no one knew about. The next day, when Natalia woke up, Alice discovered through the surveillance that it was the other personality, Natalia, who had woken up, and not Natalia. As soon as she walked downstairs, she skipped over to Hua Jin and asked with a smile, "Can I go and play with you today?" You? Hua Jin was stunned. Now that Alice was not by his side, he did not know how to reply. He had no way of monitoring Natalia. Usually, the phone that was connected to the surveillance camera was kept by Alice. Hence, he had no way of knowing which personality the girl in front of him was. "But can't I?" Natalia said with some regret. "Can I go and play with him? I'm so bored here alone." Hua Jin smiled and said, "I can play with you. But you're not fun." Natalia sat at the dining table and held her head dejectedly. She pouted and said, "Also, with this auntie around, I feel very uncomfortable." Hua Jin knew that she was not close to Alice. It was not strange that she did not like Alice. Hence, he coaxed her, "I'll take you to play with Brother Yu tomorrow, okay?" "Don't." Natalia started to whine. "I just want to play with him today, okay? Is something wrong with him?" "That's not it." After hesitating for a long time, Hua Jin finally nodded gently. "But then, I'll take you there after breakfast." "Okay." Natalia clapped her little hands happily, looking very happy. "Then you must eat your breakfast obediently before I take you there." "All right." Natalia had just finished her breakfast when Alice came downstairs. For some reason, the smile on Natalia's face faded when she saw her. Coincidentally, she had also finished her breakfast. She immediately said to Hua Jin, "I'm full. I'm going upstairs to change." With that, she headed upstairs. Alice looked back at her and asked curiously, "Change clothes? Where is she going?" Hua Jin said, "She wants to play with you." Upon hearing this, Alice's face sank slightly. She quickly walked to his side and lowered her voice as she asked, "You agree?" Hua Jin sensed that something was wrong with her expression and immediately became nervous. "What's wrong? Can't I?" "It's not that I can't. It's just that her condition is not stable now. I don't want her to interact with you." But Hua Jin found it strange. "I don't think there's anything wrong with her. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist." Alice looked at him reproachfully. "Are you going to take her out now?" Hua Jin nodded hesitantly. "Yes." Alice sighed deeply and frowned. How could she let Natalia and Yu be alone together? Naturally, she was afraid that something would go wrong. Hua Jin studied her expression and asked tentatively, "Then, should we reject her?" Chapter 42:12. Forget it. Alice waved her hand. "You've already promised her. If you don't go now, she'll definitely be suspicious. Forget it, I'll go with you and be more careful. Who knows, maybe I'll be able to observe something. Hua Jin listened and nodded. However, when the three of them were about to leave, Natalia saw that Alice was going with them and pouted unhappily. Why does she want to go with us? She muttered to Hua Jin. Obviously, she felt uncomfortable with Alice going with them. Hua Jin squatted down and asked her curiously, "Do you not like Aunt Alice?" Natalia turned around to glance at Alice and nodded sadly. "I don't know why, but I feel like she's spying on me." Even Hua Jin couldn't help but be stunned by her sensitive answer for a long time. Hua Jin lifted his head to look at Alice, but Natalia suddenly said unwillingly, "If she's going, then I won't go. I'm not a criminal. Why should she spy on me?" As she said this, she turned her head to the side and said unhappily, "I know I'm sick, seriously sick, but that's not a reason for her to spy on me." She was young, but her logic was not inferior to that of an adult. Hua Jin pursed his lips and looked at Alice helplessly. Alice looked at Hua Jin, then at Natalia, and raised her eyebrows. She could tell that the latter was unhappy that she had tagged along. She also felt that it wasn't appropriate for her to go. If Natalia was alerted, it would be detrimental to her research. Alice took a step back and said, "Why don't you guys go? I have nothing to do if I go." "But," Alice said as she turned around and went back into the house. She stood by the window until she saw Hua Jin and Natalia get into the car. 15 minutes later, she walked to the garage and started a car. She took a shortcut and sped toward Yun Shirshir's house. Natalia was on guard. Alice's sixth sense told her that the child was Natalia, not Natalia. Therefore, she absolutely could not sit back and do nothing. Because they took a shortcut, Alice arrived at Yun Shirshir's house before Hua Jin did. Yun Shirshir knew that Hua Jin and Natalia were coming, so she started preparing an exquisite lunch early in the morning. When she saw that Alice was also here, she was surprised. What happened? She looked at Alice and saw that she had come alone. She was a little confused. "Where are Hua Jin and Natalia? That little girl is on guard against me. She didn't want me to come with her, so I came secretly. She said that she wanted to play with you. I was also worried that she would interact with you alone. I want to talk to you alone." Yun Shirshir immediately nodded when she heard this. But Alice went up to the study on the second floor. Yu was reading in the study. Alice knocked on the door and walked in. Yu was a little surprised to see her. "Alice?" "Sure." Alice walked up to him, looking a little serious. Yu was stunned. "What's wrong? You don't look well. Did something happen to Natalia?" Chapter 42:13. Alice squatted down in front of him and said gently, "I found something fishy these few days. Do you still remember when Gong Fan was hypnotized by Natalia?" Yu didn't think much of it. That was a coincidence. There's no evidence. It must be Natalia who hypnotized Gong Fan. But don't you think it's too much of a coincidence? The two of them came into contact once, and something happened to Gong Fan. I suspect that Natalia's other personality, which is Natalia, might know hypnotism. How could she know hypnotism? It was unbelievable that such a young child would know such powerful hypnotism. Yu found it hard to believe. Even a hypnotist like Alice only finished her apprenticeship a few years ago. Other than Gong Fan, you haven't had any direct contact with Natalia. There are too many unknown possibilities. You can't say for sure, and I don't dare to make a conclusion either. Yu nodded slightly. I understand. You want me to be careful. Alice explained some of the usual hypnotism techniques seriously. Do you know about awake hypnotism? Yu shook his head. He didn't understand the field of hypnotism. Do you remember that I hypnotized you before? Yes, I remember that. Yes, that's trance-hypnotism. Trance-hypnotism? Yu didn't understand. What's the difference between the two? There's a big difference. When a person was awake, asleep, dreaming, and feeling happy, the brain would operate at different frequencies and release different chemicals. The different frequencies of the brain could cause different physical sensations, such as fatigue and relaxation. Hypnotism interfered with these frequencies. In other words, it interfered with the brain waves. Trance hypnotism was when a person was tired, asleep, or in a trance. The hypnotist interfered with the brain waves to achieve the goal of hypnotism. However, awake hypnotism was the highest level in the field of hypnotism. Awake hypnotism wasn't something that any hypnotist could do. Awake hypnotism required a hypnotist's talent. In other words, it had nothing to do with age. There were many classic examples of lucid hypnosis in the real world. For example, when people saw red, they would immediately think of the national flag and blood donation. When they saw yellow, they would think of sunflowers. Then, when red and yellow were together, they would think of McDonald's. This was the sober hypnosis used in commercials. As for the general public, there was no lack of a minority who accepted such clear-headed hypnosis suggestions. Alice suspected that Natalia had used sober hypnosis on Gong Fan. However, she wasn't present at the time, so she didn't know what had happened. But after Gong Fan saw Alice once, he never returned to this body, did he? Yu nodded. After hearing what he said, he also felt that this was a little too suspicious. Then, what is her goal? Yu's question stumped Alice. Even she could not be sure why Natalia would do that, and why she would use lucid hypnosis. She had thought of many possibilities, but none of them could be valid. However, her sixth sense told her that there must be something that she had missed. However, I don't understand. What's the benefit of Natalia hypnotizing Gong Fan? Chapter 42:14. I don't know. But I think there is something suspicious. Yu blurted this out of the blue. When Alice heard this, she was surprised. Go ahead. Professor Romanka worked so hard to cultivate Natalia and used her as an experimental specimen. Why did he let us take Natalia away so easily? Don't you think it's suspicious? Alice was stunned. Yu looked at her and said, I think the real suspect is Professor Romanka. Do you think it's possible for someone else to control her personality? I can't tell you now. Maybe it sounds like a fantasy story, but I do think it's suspicious. Maybe I'm just imagining things. Alice was at her wit's end. But now was not the time to talk about this. Alice looked dispirited. I don't know what went wrong. Anyway, you have to be careful when you interact with Natalia. For example, if you feel tired, don't look into her eyes, her expressions, and her movements. Is it so scary? Yu was puzzled. Even if I'm not asleep, I can still be hypnotized by her? If you feel tired, that's when your brain waves are at their weakest. It's also the time when you are most susceptible to interference. Yu nodded seriously. Okay, I understand. Downstairs, the sound of a car engine could be heard. Alice sensed that someone had arrived. She said to Yu, I'm going to the room upstairs. If anything happens, let me know, okay? I'll be upstairs. I'll try my best not to make any mistakes. If Natalia finds out that you're upstairs, she'll be suspicious. Then all our efforts will be in vain. Alice was stunned. She did not expect Yu to be so wise. Okay, I got it. Alice went upstairs. Yu went downstairs. At this time, Hua Jin was holding Natalia's hand as they walked in. When Natalia saw Yu, she showed an unprecedented enthusiasm. Yu. She skipped over and held his hand, revealing a cute smile. I'm so bored at home alone, so I wanted to come and play with you. What do you want to play? I saw the game you played with Xiao Yichen on TV. I want to play it too. Oh, is it a PS4? Yeah, it's a boxing game. Xiao Yichen bought a PS4 and an Xbox 360 at home. When he had nothing to do, he liked to pester Yu to play games. However, now that he was addicted to PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, he was not that enthusiastic about these games. Usually, only Yu and Mu Yaja would play them occasionally. There was a layer of dust on the console. This was a console game, so it had to be connected to the TV to play. The graphics were very clear, and it was similar to many games in the arcade. There were fighting games, which were good for intelligence. The last time Natalia saw Yu and Xiao Yichen playing Tekken 7, she was very interested in it. Hence, she said that she wanted to play with Yu. However, she had to go home later, so she did not play. Chapter 42:15. The two little guys surrounded the TV and played with relish. Yun Shirshir brought the desserts over, but she realized that Yu was obviously not in the mood. He was looking at the television, but it was as if he wasn't looking at the screen. He was holding a controller in his hand and randomly pressing buttons. Even so, he was randomly pressing buttons in the air. Natalia's face was red from playing with all her might, but she was still no match for Yu. "Oh, why do I keep losing to you?" Natalia was huffing and puffing her cheeks. It was obvious that she was playing with fire. Yu finally came back to his senses and said apologetically, "Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking about something just now and wasn't playing seriously." Natalia's face was full of question marks. Yu said straightforwardly, "Maybe if I play seriously, I won't be able to beat you." He thought that he was trying to coax her. However, in Natalia's eyes, it was a provocation. She pouted and said, "What do you mean by that? If you're not playing seriously, then wouldn't I be killed by your finger if you play seriously?" "That's not necessarily the case." Yu said seriously, "In this game, Xiao Yichen is still better. I've never been his match." Why won't you go easy on me?" Natalia was obviously unhappy that she had lost. She threw the controller aside and hugged her knees, looking aggrieved. Yu pursed his lips. It was obvious that he was still thinking about something. Natalia suddenly stood up and ran upstairs. She was obviously a little angry. Hua Jin saw this. If it was in the past, he would have laughed. She must be angry, so he planned to coax her. She was obviously waiting for Yu to coax her. However, Yu was unmoved. He knew what Natalia's motive was. He could even imagine that she was waiting for him to coax her. Alice had previously warned him not to be alone with Natalia. He shouldn't create this opportunity, and he shouldn't let it happen. Yu suspected that Natalia wanted to play the game with him so that she would lose on purpose and run to the room to wait for him to find her. This way, the two of them would have a chance to be alone. He believed Alice's warning. Hence, when Natalia ran upstairs, he didn't do anything. He switched to the game disc and started playing casually. Time passed by slowly. Upstairs, Natalia couldn't take it anymore. She initially thought that Yu would not bear to see her go upstairs in a fit of pique, so he would follow her upstairs and coax her. However, after waiting for so long, she still didn't see anyone. She felt strange. Alice's guess was right. The Natalia in front of him wasn't Natalia at all. She was Natalia, who had taken over her body. She had tried so hard to be alone with Yu. Alice had already seen through her and told Yu in advance. Yu naturally believed her. He didn't believe that Alice would harm him. However, he had already felt that there was something wrong with Natalia. Natalia couldn't sit still anymore. She carefully pushed open the door to the room and felt her way to the staircase. From her angle, she saw Yu sitting on the sofa in the living room. He was holding the controller and looking at the game calmly. She widened her eyes in surprise. He seemed to be unmoved by her anger. In fact, he looked cold. What was going on? Chapter 42:16. Natalia could tell that Yu had special feelings for Natalia. It was not the kind of pure friendship between children. It was not exactly love either, but she could not pinpoint exactly what kind of feelings it was. She only knew that Natalia had a special place in the boy's heart. She took advantage of this. Natalia secretly bit her finger. She was close to the time limit that Professor Romanka had set for her. She had to complete this task as soon as possible. Otherwise, she did not know how to explain it to Professor Romanka. Xianxia walked from the kitchen to the living room. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of Natalia hiding in the corner of the stairs. She pretended not to see her and walked to Yu's side. She handed him a glass of fresh apple juice. "Your favorite apple juice. You love to eat apples." In addition, Alice had given Xianxia a nutritional formula that required Yu to eat 3 apples a day to replenish his nutrients. Strengthening his physique was Yu's top priority now. However, just thinking about eating 3 big apples made his cheeks hurt. In the beginning, Yu could not insist on this at all. It was already hard enough to chew on 1 apple, let alone 3. He couldn't do it at all. Thus, Xianxia thought of squeezing 3 apples into juice. It was sweet and sour, and Yu liked it too. This way, it would be the best of both worlds. When Xianxia handed him the apple juice, she lowered her voice and said, "She is at the stairs, secretly watching you." Yu Yu heard this and took the apple juice without batting an eyelid. He also secretly looked in the direction of the stairs. Natalia did not notice that Yu Yu was secretly sizing her up. Yu Yu suddenly hooked his finger at Xianxia. She is Natalia. How did you know? Alice told me. Yu Yu continued. Alice did not allow me to be alone with Natalia. She was worried that Natalia knew how to hypnotize people. Hypnotize people? Xianxia heard this and her heart trembled. She recalled that time when Yu Yu was hypnotized and his personality was sealed. She even thought that Yu Yu's personality would never come back. Therefore, she was very nervous and could not help being careful. Don't be nervous. You said, I will protect myself. Just pretend that you did not hear anything. Okay. You and Xianxia acted. And her. Hua Jin was focused on Yu Yu's game. And everyone seemed to be ignoring Natalia. Natalia was especially upset. Could it be that she had been seen through? Impossible. She had tried very hard to imitate Natalia's words and actions. How could she be seen through? However, Yu Yu's attitude towards her had turned cold. That was a fact. Natalia went back to the room. After waiting for a while, she fell asleep without realizing it. Alice was on the 3rd floor. She sent a WeChat message to Hua Jin. Hua Jin replied that he had gone to the room to take a look and found that Natalia had fallen asleep. Hence, Alice said, let's take her home while she's asleep. But what if she wakes up? She won't wake up. Once a child of her age falls asleep, she won't wake up so easily. Chapter 42:17. Hua Jin carefully carried Natalia into the car and went home early. Alice finally came down from upstairs. When Yu Yu saw her, he immediately stood up and said without hiding anything, I've noticed it too. Natalia's second personality is called Natalia, right? Yes, I remember mentioning this name to you. She seemed to be able to create an opportunity to be alone with me today. Yu Yu frowned. What's going on? Have you finally noticed what's wrong with her? Alice said honestly, there aren't many clues now. I'm worried that Natalia's second personality is too shrewd and will realize that I'm observing her sooner or later. In this way, if she raises her guard, I won't be able to notice anything fishy about her. Then are you sure that Gong Fan's disappearance has something to do with her? When Alice heard this, she took a deep breath and said in a low voice, I'm sorry, I'm not sure. I'm just suspecting. But I feel that the possibility of it being related to her is very high. That's why I hope that you'll raise your guard so that you won't make the same mistake again. When Xianxia heard this, she couldn't help but hug Yu Yu tightly. Yu Yu looked up and saw Xianxia's forbearing gaze. He turned around and said to Alice, How do you know about Gong Fan's current situation? Alice was stunned. What do you mean? You also know that Gong Fan has disappeared for too long. Did he really disappear, or did something happen because of Natalia? Is she in danger? I want to ask you to help me find him. When Alice heard this, she was surprised. She said half jokingly, half seriously, Isn't Gong Fan's disappearance good news to you? When Yu Yu heard this, he was in a daze for a long time. Then he lowered his head and said in a low voice, In the past, I probably thought that if Gong Fan suddenly disappeared without a trace, it would be something to be happy about. At least, his departure wasn't accompanied by too much pain. But now, I don't think so. But Alice didn't know if she should ask, but she still wanted to know more about Yu Yu's feelings. Yu Yu said honestly, whether it's him or me, we're all part of this life. Without him, I'm not me, and without me, he's not him. Was the name, the miracle that was formed. I couldn't lose him. Mommy couldn't lose him either. Yueyao couldn't lose him. Xiao Yichen couldn't lose him either. If he was so important, why did he disappear just like that? In the past, I felt that he had occupied my body for too long, so I couldn't spend more time with Mommy. Now, if he can hear me, I want to say that I'm willing to sacrifice more time for him to come back. If he's willing, I can let Mommy tell him a bedtime story every night and sing to him. As Yu Yu spoke, her tears fell unknowingly. When Xianxia saw this, her heart felt like it was being stabbed by a knife. Her heart ached as she hugged him. Yu Yu, don't be sad. How can I not be sad? Chapter 42:18. Yu Yu suppressed his sadness and said, He didn't say goodbye and left without saying goodbye. No one knows where he went. Every night, I would call his name repeatedly before I went to bed, but he didn't seem to hear me. I was thinking, where did he go? Did he not want mommy and me anymore? He made mommy sad. I hate him. Yun Shirshir was helpless and sad. She secretly wiped his tears and said, You, don't be so sad. Yu still said angrily, if he doesn't come back, then forget it. He won't. She cupped his little face and rubbed against it affectionately. If he doesn't come back, it's okay too. But mommy must really want him to come home. Yu looked into her eyes seriously. That day, I heard everything. Yu lowered his eyes in disappointment. Mommy must miss him a lot, right? I didn't protect him well. It's my fault. Alice furrowed her brows, feeling a little sad. We can't make a conclusion too early. No one knows what Natalia did to Gong Fan, but Gong Fan's personality shouldn't disappear so easily. Yu looked at her in surprise. How can you be so sure? If Gong Fan's personality disappeared so easily, the field of multiple personality disorder wouldn't be one of the most complicated topics in the world. There are countless people with multiple personality disorder who haven't been cured. If the problem can be solved so easily, it doesn't exist at all. Alice continued. Moreover, Natalia has multiple personality disorder. She's a patient herself. How can she cure other patients? When Yu heard this, he asked tentatively, so you're saying that Gong Fan's personality can't disappear? With the clues and scientific evidence I have now, it's impossible for him to disappear. Alice gave a definite conclusion. When Yu heard this, his brows finally relaxed. He suddenly said, if you need to do research, I can do it anytime. Since you said that there's a problem with my body, then if you want to study it, I can do it anytime. Alice was a little embarrassed and said, I want to, but your mommy is not very assured. If I really want to study you, I'll need your guardian's permission. Yun Shirshir looked hesitant. Even though he was now so familiar with Alice, even though the woman in front of him had once saved Gong Jie's life and was absolutely a trustworthy person. However, she was still worried and would not easily hand Yu over to her. I'm worried. Yun Shirshir did not hide anything and said frankly, I didn't know that you would do such research on him, but I can't be at ease if I just hand Yu over to you. Alice shrugged innocently with a helpless expression on her face. It was as if his gaze was saying, your mommy will have to be convinced by you. I don't have the right to do it without her consent. Yu knew very well that Yun Shirshir was worried about him. After all, they had been through so many life and death separations, she was not willing to take any more risks. It was not that she was worried about Alice. She was worried that Yu would be separated from her again because of some unforeseen event, or that he would not acknowledge her as his mommy like before. Chapter 42:19. Mommy, if you're by my side, then it'll be fine. Yu gently tugged at her sleeve and asked cautiously, let's try it once. Let's try it once, okay? Yun Shirshir looked at Yu hesitantly and then looked at Alice. Alice placed her hand over her heart and said earnestly, don't worry, I won't dissect Yu. I'm only using the sleep test and hypnotizing method to find out more about Gong Fan. Yun Shirshir hesitated for a while and finally nodded reluctantly. Alice hadn't expected her to agree. When Yun Shirshir nodded, she was stunned. She had thought that Yun Shirshir would reject her again, but she hadn't expected her to agree. She was stunned for a long time before she came back to her senses. Yun Shirshir said to her seriously, I trust you because you trusts you too. Okay, I understand. Don't worry, I won't let you down. Sleep monitoring didn't require a huge device. Alice had brought a sleep monitoring device from the headquarters. That night, she rushed over early with the device. In the room, she instructed Yu to lie on the bed and put on a sleep monitoring headrest for him. She turned on the power and his brain waves were displayed on the small screen. What's this? These are your brain waves. Then, is there any explanation for the sleep monitoring? Yu suddenly felt that he hadn't asked the right question. He asked again, why do you want to monitor my sleep? It monitors the frequency of your brain waves when you sleep. From the details of the frequency, we can find many problems. Alice then said to him, go to sleep. I can't sleep now. Alice was stunned. Your mommy said that you usually sleep at this time. But wearing this device doesn't seem comfortable. Yu fiddled with the device on her head and frowned. It feels quite uncomfortable. Alice carefully adjusted it for him again. How about this? That's much better. Xianxia quickly walked into the room. When Yu saw her, his eyes lit up. Why don't I ask mommy to tell me some stories? Maybe I can fall asleep this way. You don't have to tell me a story, just close your eyes. I want to monitor the quality of your sleep, including the degree and time of your sleep, Alice said. When Yu heard this, she felt bored and told her honestly, usually, it's mommy who tells me stories. If I don't listen to her stories, I'll feel uncomfortable. This means that you rely too much on your mommy. Can your mommy tell you bedtime stories for the rest of your life? As Alice said this, she pushed him and urged him, close your eyes and sleep. When Yu heard this, he sighed like an old man and gently closed his eyes. When he lay down, he looked at the ceiling and closed his eyes slightly. Although he squinted his eyes, he didn't feel sleepy at all. Alice asked, don't you want to sleep? Yeah, I can't sleep. Yu mumbled. Although his eyes were closed, his eyelids were twitching violently. Relax. Alice turned her head and looked at the monitor. On the screen, the frequency was jumping violently. This meant that Yu's mind was filled with thoughts and he was thinking about something. No wonder he wanted to listen to Xianxia's bedtime stories. Chapter 42:20. Do you let your thoughts run wild every night before you go to bed? What do you think about? Yu closed his eyes. He answered Alice's questions without holding anything back. I think about Gong Fan and our future. Xianxia sat down at the side and quietly listened to the exchange of questions and answers between the two. It was in such a relaxed state that Yu was completely unguarded. Instead, he was able to tell her everything that was on his mind. Do you like Gong Fan? So. Do you hate him? I don't. Then what kind of feelings do you have for him? Yu pondered for a moment and finally let out a long sigh. I owe him. I feel guilty. Why? 'Cause I was the one who forced him out. It's just that in the past, I've been chasing him away, trying to get him out of my body. Yu's eyelashes suddenly twitched violently. The frequency of the monitoring on the screen was getting faster and faster. He suffered pain that he shouldn't have to suffer, but I was so cowardly that I avoided all of it. He suffered so much for me, but I saw him as an evil person. Actually, he's not a bad person. It's just that he has always received negative and repressed emotions. That's why he developed a dark personality. But not only did I not understand, when Xianxia heard this, she couldn't help but feel her heart ache. She covered her mouth tightly and felt extremely guilty. She didn't want Yu to hear her sobbing. She felt heartache, powerless, and uneasy. She knew what kind of childhood Yu had had. Back then, she had kept Yu by her side out of selfishness. However, she hadn't given him a peaceful childhood. She should have known. She didn't have the ability to give him a good childhood, but she had kept him by her side out of selfishness. It was all her fault. Xianxia felt lonely, but then she heard Alice ask, did you create him? Why? Because, Yu's calm brows furrowed slightly as a tear rolled down from the corner of her eye. I feel lonely. Xianxia widened her eyes in shock. Lonely? Why do I feel lonely? When I was young, everyone had parents, brothers, sisters, and so many friends. But I felt that I couldn't get along well with those children. Why? Why can't we get along well? Because I keep feeling that their world is different from mine. Their parents would send them to school, and after school, someone would send them home. When they got home, they would have a warm dinner, but I didn't. I also want to have a father and a brother. I fantasize about having such a family, but I know that mommy is also very lonely. I shouldn't force so much. So, I always imagined that I had an older brother, until one day, I felt that he had appeared. Do you remember what day it was? Chapter 42:21. Yu paused and his voice suddenly became gloomy. When I fell asleep at night, I saw him in my dream. He was standing there alone, covered in injuries. Was it Gong Fan? Yes, at that time, he didn't have a name. He didn't seem to see me, but I could see him standing in the dark world with a lonely gaze. Yu continued, he didn't have any friends. Alice looked at him and suddenly asked softly, have you ever thought of being friends with him? Yu frowned and said uneasily, I was afraid that he would snatch her from me. Snatch from what? Mommy. Yu gradually looked exhausted. Apart from Mommy, I have nothing. I don't have any friends or family. I only have Mommy. What if he snatches Mommy away from me? So, at that time, I hoped that he would die. Yu's voice suddenly became cold. I hoped that he would never appear in my world again. Alice furrowed her brows and turned to look at Xianxia, only to see that the latter's face was already streaked with tears. I'm sorry, she prayed in her heart. She didn't expect that his childhood experience would leave Yu with such a dark world in his heart. But, later on, I didn't want him to die. Yu was obviously in a difficult situation. He rubbed his eyes and turned over slightly. Alice immediately adjusted the blanket for him. Why didn't you want him to die? Because Mommy seems to like him a lot. Yu said seriously, I also feel very guilty towards him. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have been able to bear the pressure of the darkness. I feel that Gong Fan is a real strong person. He stands in the dark and is so calm. He has suffered so much for me. It would be too cruel for me to chase him away. Mommy also loves him and loves him. So, I hope that he will stay. When we were young, he bore so much for me. Now that I'm bearing this for him, it's not worth mentioning. Actually, if you had told your Mommy about what had happened to you back then, you wouldn't have had to go through all this. Yu suddenly sighed helplessly. I don't want that. I don't want Mommy to know about this. His resolute tone surprised Alice. Because I happened to hear Mommy and Grandpa mention that she regretted keeping me by her side. Perhaps it was because she saw that I didn't have a good childhood, so she wanted to send me back to Daddy's side and let me live a better life. If I let her know that I'm not doing well, she'll definitely send me away. You can't bear to leave your Mommy. Even if I die, Yu's lips parted. I want to die in Mommy's arms too. I'm not going anywhere. When Xianxia heard this, she stood up gently and walked to the balcony. She lowered her head weakly. After about a quarter of an hour, Alice also came out. She leaned against the railing and casually lit a cigarette. The smell of smoke drifted into Xianxia's nose, but she didn't find it pungent. She even gasped and choked a few times. Why did you come out? Alice raised her eyebrows. You can't bear it? When he said those words just now, what kind of state was he in? Chapter 42-22. Goodness gracious. Xianxia was extremely vexed. What had she done? He was still so young. Why did he have to go through such a cruel experience? It's all my fault. Xianxia covered her face sadly and said in a daze, at that time, I shouldn't have kept him by my side out of selfishness. I clearly didn't have the means to give him a wonderful childhood. I shouldn't have brought him back. It's all my fault. It's all my fault. Alice looked at Xianxia's sad expression and felt her heart ache. She didn't have a child, but she could understand this feeling. She imagined that she wanted to give him the best thing in the world. However, the reality was, she didn't have the ability to do so. Alice smiled helplessly and said plainly, Who said that you didn't give him the best thing in the world? Xianxia looked up with tears in her eyes and looked at her in surprise. Alice smiled. To him, aren't you the best thing in the world? Xianxia was stunned. She opened her mouth in surprise. When she came back to her senses, she gently wiped away her tears. When she heard the conversation between Yu and Alice while he was half awake, she felt heartbroken. However, when she heard what Alice said now, she felt a little conflicted. Don't give him what he thinks is good, and don't blindly put all the blame on yourself. Life is irreversible. Everything can't be overturned. Accept everything calmly. Thank you. Xianxia said, to think that I was still wary of you. I didn't expect you to be so much more mature than me. If you care too much about someone, you'll naturally be confused. As Alice said this, she flipped through the printed monitoring report and took a drag on her cigarette. Xianxia looked at it. There were all kinds of complicated lines on it. She couldn't understand it and asked curiously, "What is this?" "This is the frequency of his sleep quality. This is before he fell asleep, and this is after he fell asleep." Alice pointed at the paper and said to her, "Did you notice that after he fell asleep, the frequency of his brain waves became stronger?" "What does this mean?" "This means," Alice frowned and said, "this means that his sleep quality is very poor." "Poor sleep quality?" Alice said, "Patients with dual personality are most afraid of poor sleep quality. If the quality of sleep was not good, the negative mental pressure would be too strong, and it would be very easy for one's mental power to collapse. A person's willpower was often very weak. Sometimes, it could be very strong and seemingly indestructible. But often, the more indestructible a person looked, the easier it was for a straw to crush him. Therefore, having a good sleep quality was also the only way to maintain a good mental state. When people don't sleep well, it's easy for them to get anxious." Xianxia nodded. "No wonder. I also felt that Yu's mental strength had become very poor recently. During the day, he was always depressed and looked like he had a lot on his mind. Yu is very dependent on you." But this kind of dependence might not be a good thing. Sooner or later, he will have his own family. If he continues to rely on you like this, it won't be a good thing. Chapter 42:23. Xianxia nodded solemnly. "I know that too. I also feel that he shouldn't rely on me so much. However, Yu is already much more independent than before. Actually, I can understand the bond between the two of you. After all, for a very long time, at least since he was born, you have always been by his side. Hence, his dependence on you can't be replaced by anyone else. Similarly, your dependence on him can't be replaced by anyone else. But have you ever thought that he can't rely on you for the rest of his life?" Xianxia hummed in acknowledgement. "I understand now. However, the most important thing now is to find out what exactly happened to him. Do you want Gongfan to come back?" Alice asked seriously. Xianxia didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at her hesitantly. Alice sighed. "I can tell that you are very hesitant. On one hand, you can't bear to part with Gongfan. On the other hand, you don't want to be a burden to Yu, right?" "Yes." "Yu only feels guilty towards Gongfan. What about you? Apart from guilt, is there anything else?" Alice's question made Xianxia fall into a daze. In her mind, she seemed to have already imagined Gongfan snuggling in her arms and hugging her helplessly. She still remembered that in front of others, he had always been arrogant and unruly. Only in front of her, there was a hint of vulnerability that others couldn't detect. "Mommy, don't ever leave me behind." He was afraid that she would leave him behind. Xianxia understood that the choice was in her hands now. Did Yu really care that much about Gongfan? Not necessarily. He probably felt more guilty towards Gongfan. However, more than that, he was afraid that she would be sad. Yu probably had many ways to make Gongfan disappear and send him to the land of exile. Even if Gongfan was unwilling to leave, if she said, "I don't want you anymore," Gongfan would definitely leave disheartened. But the most contradictory thing was that she would rather Gongfan live in her world than in Yu's. If it were her, she would be willing to bear all the pain. However, if it was Yu, she couldn't bear to let Yu carry so much burden. She also had no right to interfere with Yu's thoughts. If Yu was unwilling to coexist with Gongfan, then it would be meaningless for her to force him. Moreover, if she put Yu in a difficult position, Yu would be the one to suffer. Thinking of this, Xianxia's heart ached. Her hands fell weakly and she sighed. "Forget it, I can't make Gongfan stay. No matter what, I just want Yu to be fine. I can't put so much pressure on Yu because of my own thoughts. If you must force me to make a decision, I'm willing to." Xianxia almost could not go on with her words. She looked up and looked at Alice seriously. Holding back her tears, she choked and said, "I'm willing to give up Gongfan." This sentence was undoubtedly a knife to her heart. But she had no choice. She could not bear to see Yu on the brink of agony. Give up? Xianxia persuaded herself. She thought that Yu would definitely understand her decision. Chapter 42:24. Can I perform hypnosis on Yu tomorrow? Hypnosis? She could tell that Xianxia was extremely nervous when she heard the word hypnosis. She looked at her warily. Alice laughed when she saw this. Don't tell me you're thinking that I'm going to hypnotize Yu and make him lose his memory again? You won't. Xianxia was just too sensitive. After all, she didn't have a good impression of the word hypnosis. The first time I performed hypnosis on Yu, I didn't get your consent. But it's different now. I'll seek your opinion now. If you agree, I can perform the hypnosis then. Why are you performing the hypnosis? Xianxia asked with concern. She had to understand the nature and purpose of the hypnosis before she could come to a conclusion. Alice said, I want to find Gong Fan. The hypnosis was scheduled for 1:30 p.m. the next day. Alice had chosen this time because it was the time when people would feel sleepy after a full meal. At the same time, it was also the time when people would feel most relaxed. There was a high chance that the hypnosis would succeed at this time. Yu naturally agreed and was willing to undergo the hypnosis. She also wanted to know where Gong Fan was hiding. The hypnosis process may produce some painful images. Can you withstand it when you enter the depths of your dreams? Yu didn't think much of it and said casually, no matter how painful it is, can it be as painful as the first time I was hypnotized? Alice couldn't help but feel guilty. She cleared her throat awkwardly and didn't say a word. Yu turned to Xianxia and said, Mommy, I'm going to start the hypnosis. Don't be here anymore. Be good and wait outside the door. Don't you want me to be here? Before Yu could reply, Alice immediately explained. When you perform the hypnosis, it's best not to have a third party present. Otherwise, the hypnotized person will be easily disturbed. But I understand. Xianxia stood up and silently left the room. She respected Alice's opinion. Yu lay down on the recliner. From this angle, the afternoon sun shone on her body, especially on her face. It was warm and moist, and for a moment, she felt sleepy. Alice casually placed a metronome next to her. She sat beside Yu and talked to him softly. Her voice became softer and softer. Gradually, Yu's eyelids became heavier and heavier. Relax. Close your eyes and imagine yourself lying on a patch of grass with the wind gently blowing on your face. Alice's voice was bewitching, guiding Yu's thoughts in the direction she wanted. Yu finally closed her eyes and her breathing gradually became even. He successfully entered the dreamland. When he opened his eyes again, he realized that he was really lying on a patch of grass. There was a blue sky and white clouds. There was a gentle breeze and the sun surrounded him. It was warm and comfortable. He just lay there freely and couldn't bear to move for a moment. What do you see? Alice's voice was still accompanying him. Yu opened his eyes and looked up at the sky. He saw a kite floating in the sky, flying higher and higher. I see a kite. The kite? Chapter 42:25. This Gong Fan? Yu blurted out. Alice was stunned. Gong Fan? How could it be? In the dream, Yu was already running toward Gong Fan without a care for anything else. He was standing on the top of the mountain and could see far away. From his angle, he could easily see the person who was running and flying a kite at the foot of the mountain. He had the same attire, clothes, and face as him. However, his expression was cold. Even when he was flying the kite, his face did not have the innocence that a child of his age should have. Instead, he was looking at the kite in the sky silently. From time to time, he would step back and tug gently. Gong Fan. Yu did not expect to see him. He immediately ran towards him happily. Gong Fan. He was getting closer. It was as if there was wind under his feet. He quickly came to Gong Fan's side and called out softly. Gong Fan seemed to have heard his voice. He turned around and looked at him coldly, but a sense of disgust appeared in his heart. Why are you here? His indifferent gaze was so unfamiliar that it made Yu freeze on the spot. Yu was surprised and distant. Although he did not have any direct contact with Gong Fan due to various reasons, at least they would communicate through the notebook. He could tell that Gong Fan was very friendly to him. However, the child in front of him was different. His eyes were filled with hostility and coldness. What's wrong with you? Yu Yu moved closer to him and tentatively reached out to touch him. "Don't touch me." Gong Fan flung his hand away and turned to leave. When Yu Yu saw this, he was stunned for a moment and immediately chased after him. However, just as he took a few steps, it was as if he had crossed a boundary. The entire world instantly turned dark. "Gong Fan." "Yu Yu?" Alice held Yu Yu's hand and kept calling him. However, Yu did not respond. She widened her eyes in shock. She did not expect her hypnosis to go out of control for the first time in history. Could Yu Yu not hear her voice? No, she had to end this hypnosis. Alice would not allow anything to go wrong with this hypnosis. "I'll count to 3. Yu Yu, wake up and walk out. 3, 2, 1. She played the metronome gently and snapped her fingers in front of Yu Yu's face. "Wake up." There was still no reaction from the boy after a long while. Alice stood up abruptly in frustration. Oh no, it seemed to have gone out of control. How could this happen? Could it be that Yu Yu had been lured into a dream that she could not enter? In the dream, Yu Yu was in a dark world. It was like a void of chaos. He could not see anything clearly. He forced himself to calm down quickly and looked around. It was as if he was standing on top of an abyss. At first glance, it was like a bottomless black hole. He could not see the end. He tried to take a step forward. However, he stepped on nothing and his body suddenly fell. He felt a strong centrifugal force. He felt as if he was falling towards the end of the abyss. It was a dream. It was a dream. It was a dream. As he fell, he kept telling himself that it was a dream and that he should not believe it. Once he believed that it was a dream, he would be trapped in it.